inhabited by spirits, angels, demons, and saints. In our time, many yearn to break free of the prison of a flat, secular materialism, to see and to know reality as it truly is. What is this spiritual reality like? How do we engage with it well? How do we permeate everyday life with spiritual presence? Orthodox Christian priests Father Andrew Stephen Damick and Father Stephen DeYoung host this live call-in show focused on enchantment in creation, the union of the seen and unseen as made by God and experienced by mankind throughout history. Welcome to the Lord of Spirits.
Hey, good evening, Dragon Slayers, Giant Killers, Mobbins of the magisterial 1962 Alfred Newman soundtrack to How the West Was Won. You're listening to the 133rd episode of Lord of Spirits podcast. And I'm Father Andrew Stephen Damick, and with me is the talk of Twitter, Father Stephen DeYoung himself.
Which is impressive since I'm not on Twitter.
I know. Rent-free and all that.
Talking about you right in front of my face, behind my back.
We're live. The great gatekeeper Mike Purgatorial Bedpan DeGan will be taking your calls tonight, beginning in the second half. The other day, my brother sent to me a DM, and he told me that he's been out in Colorado, where he used to work, and I think the company he works for now is still there, although he lives in another state. And he was having dinner with one of his former coworkers, and a guy that he worked with years ago. And apparently, this fellow told him that he and his wife, his family, had converted to Orthodox Christianity recently, and that they were fans of this particular show. And my brother's sitting there listening to him talk about this, and he goes, "So you know that that guy on that show is my brother, right?" And apparently, somehow, this fellow had never put two and two together that he only knew two people with the name Damick. So anyway, Eric Sexton.
Does he live in a Lithuanian community of some sort?
I know. Eric Sexton, Colorado. What's wrong with you? I mean, he's my brother. Just kidding. Very nice of you to listen.
You're just going like straight Casey Kasem long distance dedications now.
Exactly. Wow. Exactly. So tonight, though, we have a very special treat, an entirely uncontroversial episode with zero spicy takes from Father Stephen. This episode is designed to ease you into Great Lent, detach you from all the cares of this world, and calm your troubled soul. That said, I'm going to go ahead and get all of the objections out of the way now. So number one, Father Stephen, you're being unfair. You're just mean. You haven't really read everything. You don't understand. You're making caricatures. You are a modernist. You're warring against the saints. That's my favorite one. Did I miss any?
Yes. We're talking on the internet, and someone might hear this outside of North America. So
that's right.
We're teaching outside of our diocese.
You're teaching outside of your diocese.
So just to clarify that, if you're in North America, you must slavishly obey everything we say on this program. But if you are
you're inside our archdiocese.
If you're on any other continent, or even in Mexico or Central America, you could freely ignore everything we say.
What about those unclaimed regions of Antarctica?
Yeah, so there's some dodgy things, like Puerto Rico, I think technically is in a different archdiocese and stuff. That
is true, even though it's technically part of North America.
Technically, it's part of the United States. So yeah, there's some nitty gritty here, people. If you're on the edge, just disregard. Just
go do something else with your evening.
But if you're in the contiguous United States or a Canadian province, this is the law of the Medes and the Persians. There's no escape for you. That's how that works, right?
That's right. Pregnant pause. So we're talking about Latin theology.
Yes, which is obviously going to be non-controversial.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. Yes. I'm ready.
Yes.
Our last episode was a big hit and really reached a broad, everyone loved it. especially those people out there who believe that penal substitutionary atonement which is a heresy, is Orthodox Christian doctrine.
Is a thing, yes.
I know.
Yeah, well, they're going to love this one.
Yes.
Even more.
I'm into it.
But by the way, I am unfair and I am mean. I should also clarify that.
Yes, can confirm.
Yes, I will hurt people emotionally with my words. And I'm unrepentant about it. And I haven't read everything. That is true.
That is.
I've not read everything. There are a vast array of products sold in stores in the United States. I have not read their nutrition facts labels.
My youngest son, by the way, is on this. His sister, who is 10 years older than he is, showed him a documentary about processed food. And now, like, if anything is like ultra or highly processed or whatever, he'll just refuse to eat it. So we're thinking, when you mentioned that, I was triggered, you know.
Yeah, see, I get triggered the exact opposite way. Like, when I watched Super Size Me, like, I was craving a Big Mac. Like, seriously. Like, that scene with Dancing Ronald McDonald where they play Pusher Man, I was like, man, I got to get to the drive-thru like now. I'm pausing the movie. So, yeah. But that's not what we're pushing today. See, that's a segue.
Great.
We're talking about Latin theology, and we'll start with why are we talking about Latin theology instead of Western theology or the West or Western Christianity or one of those things?
Yeah.
And the reason for that is several. If you're a longtime listener to the show, you know about my very popular take that the West is a false construct. The West, the way it's talked about, or Western civilization, is kind of nonsense, in that there is not really a narrative through line that begins in ancient Sumer and ends with post-World War II United States global hegemony. That is no more a real thing than 19th century German pretensions were a real thing. To be the pinnacle of human civilization. But there's sort of more problems with it than that. What is and isn't part of the West is kind of arbitrary and selective depending on what's being talked about. So when you get that Western Civ narrative that starts in Sumer, obviously we want to claim all of ancient Greece, right? Philosophy, democracy, right. All that kind of stuff. Even Greek mythology a little bit in a watered down version. But then, like, after that, Greece isn't part of the West anymore.
Yeah. It moved out. The West moved on.
And Russia, like, sometimes is and sometimes isn't, right? In the Western Civ narrative. Like, it pops up a few times. Like, you read about the Bolshevik Revolution and stuff. And Russian involvement in World War I and II. You know, and then it's out. And so if you try to then apply that narrative to, like, what is Western and Eastern theology, then it gets super confused. So it's like, when did Greek theology, like, obviously the New Testament is written in Greek, so apostolic Greek theology is part of Western theology, I guess. And then, you know, they kind of like the Cappadocians and stuff. And then there's some nebulous point where all of a sudden it stops being Western theology and starts being Eastern theology. And same thing Russia-wise. And so it's not super helpful. And plus, people who use this narrative of the West, especially the people who want to save it or something, their narrative always involves kind of saving it from itself.
Yeah, it's some usually earlier version of quote unquote the West that needs to be
saved from the later version of the same thing that it evolved into.
Yeah.
So like the Enlightenment, some people want to cut it off before the Enlightenment or even before the Renaissance. Some people will accept the Enlightenment because they like America and they want to include the founding fathers and stuff. So they'll include some of the Enlightenment stuff, but then they want to stop it after that. They definitely don't want to include like Karl Marx, who lived in like Germany and England in the West, right? Like we don't want him. He's clearly not, even though again, he's a Hegelian, right? Like he's Karl Marx stands in this through line, right? So like all of these things are Western phenomena from which the West needs to be saved, according to this narrative. Also very confused, right? And that's going to fold over in, as we're going to see later tonight, that those like philosophical names, for example, are going to fold over into Latin theological movements.
Yeah.
Right. So all of that makes the West, or Western Christianity, or Western theology, not the right adjective, right, to use. Whereas when we're talking about Latin theology, right, this seems to be a much more descriptive term, makes sense to describe the set of phenomena we're going to be describing, the genealogy we're going to lay out tonight. So our genealogy is really going to start with what are essentially Greek concepts, Christian concepts expressed in Greek, we should say, being translated into Latin. And that's both for Western Europe, but also Western North Africa, while that is still a Christian thing before the Islamic conquest. And so it covers that layer, right? But also, once it is separate, Latin theology is a very good descriptor for Roman Catholicism, because before Vatican II, it's all being done in Latin. And even afterwards, it's Latin terminology and everything that has set the stage. And even in Protestantism, though Protestants today, shall we say, especially evangelicals today, do not have a strong identification with Latin. Not only are all the theological terms for the Reformation, like justification, sanctification, glorification, all Latin terms, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, Calvin wrote his Institutes in Latin. He wrote a commentary on the Latin Vulgate, right? Like, Latin was the language used by scholars and theologians, Protestant theologians, for centuries, right? After the Protestant Reformation. So for all those reasons, describing it, this sort of through line, as Latin theology, even though after the first half of the 20th century, less and less of it is in Latin per se, seems still to be a better descriptor, and to distinguish it from theology that's going on in, for example, Greek and Slavic circles, without, neither includes anything we don't want to include, nor excludes anything we don't want to exclude. So that's why we're talking about Latin theology. That's why we're using those terms. And so, as we said, Latin theology per se begins with Latin translation, right? And by Latin translation, I'm not just talking about, though this is included, I'm not just talking about translating the Bible into Latin, translating the liturgy into Latin, those kind of things, the translation of actual Greek Christian texts into Latin, but also the translation of theology into Latin. We've talked before on the show about how the correct way to understand what's going on at the ecumenical councils with terms like homoousios and these kind of things is that biblical concepts often concepts that started out in Hebrew or Aramaic, the concept itself is being translated, meaning a label from a new language is being applied to that concept. Okay. So that label, that word, could be used as a descriptor to describe a concept that already existed within Christian theology.
Yeah.
Okay. And so the same thing is going to happen in the transition from Greek to Latin. Okay. So the terminology, right, of nature, person, right, those are both Latin words, by the way, right? Essence, right? All of these things are going to get shifted from the original Greek term to a Latin term. And this happens beginning at the very end, like the last decade of the 2nd century. An effort toward this starts to be made in the West, because at that point, they're in a situation where the only place where Greek was being used commonly in Western Europe and Christian North Africa was in Christian circles and in the liturgy.
Yeah, I mean, the original Mass in the West, I've heard, I mean, I'm not a specialist in this, but I've heard that it was either entirely in Greek originally, or at least included a significant amount of Greek. Certainly to this day, if you go to even a Latin Mass, there is a significant chunk that is in Greek, where they're singing Kyrie eleison and Christe eleison. You know, these are not Latin phrases.
Right. And so, very end of the 2nd century, you've got, really, it's only Christian circles and only within the liturgy and liturgical kind of thing that Greek is being used. This means, unless you're in Christian circles and growing up in Christian circles and around Christian circles, you are less and less likely to be fluent in Greek. Right. And so there comes to be a general social pressure. Well, we need to translate this into Latin so that people can understand it. Over the course of those couple of centuries, though, by the time you get to the late 4th century, beginning of the 5th century, because now Latin is being used in the churches, Latin is being used by Christian authors. Now in the West, there's no real compelling reason for anyone who's not a scholar or doing trade with the East or something similar to learn Greek.
Right.
And so everything then becomes Latin, right? And when you get toward the end of that, the big events that we tend to think of in terms of Latin translation, so St. Jerome's Vulgate, right? His translation of the Latin Bible, of the Bible into Latin, or the Bishop of Rome at the time of the late 4th century, having a Latin Mass per se, right? Those are not the first translations. Translations had started long before that, but those are standardizations. St. Jerome was brought in not to translate the Bible into Latin, into which it had never been translated before. There were Latin translations of the Psalms already. There were Latin translations of specific books of the Bible, but they were different in different places and had been done by different people. And they were being used in churches, but they were of varying quality. And so St. Jerome is brought in to standardize the Latin Bible, not to be the first translator. And then there was the whole uprising. The first RSV KJV fight happened not in the 1950s in the United States, but in North Africa at the beginning of the 5th century, when they got St. Jerome's Psalm translations. And people literally rioted in some of the churches because the Psalm translations they were used to got replaced.
Yeah.
By these new ones. And that was like the end of the world. See, people don't change, folks. Individual people change over the course of their life, but people as a whole, people as a group.
Yeah.
We don't change that much. So there's this standardization, right, of the Latin. And then, as we mentioned, the fact that now Latin is being used everywhere in Christian circles, and the fact that Christianity is now the religion of the Roman Empire by the time we get into the end of the 4th, beginning of the 5th century, means that, as we said, there's no compelling reason for the average person living in Christian North Africa or Western Europe to learn Greek. And so people don't. That's why is that a problem? Well, because, as we said, the way translation works, especially in this case, we tend to think somewhat naively that there is a word in one language that equals a word in another language, right? Like, what is the Greek word for tree? What is the Greek word for dog, right?
Yeah.
And that seems to make sense to us as long as we're talking about nouns like that.
Sure.
Right? Like, you could go in your yard and I could point at a tree and I could say, I call that a tree, and my friend next to me could say el árbol, and we could go, okay.
Yeah.
Those are the two words for that thing. But when you get to concepts, when you get even to verbs, right, denoting actions, especially abstract actions and abstract ideas, homoousios, right? When you get to those kinds of concepts and words, right, it's not like you could just point at something, right? And so what you're doing now is you're finding a label in the new language, as we said, to apply to the concept that has a certain Greek label. Okay. And you don't do that at random, right? You don't say, okay, our word for homoousios is going to be canis, which means dog, right? Like that, right? You're trying to find something in Latin that's as close as you can get to that concept, right? And there's a sort of reliance in that first generation. There's this reliance on the fact that that first generation is familiar with the concept, right? They're familiar with the concept. They're just learning the Latin word for it. Okay. Problem is, right, you go a couple of centuries, and the only access the people a couple of centuries later have to the concept is the Latin word that was chosen.
Yeah, so early on, the word is picked, and the concept is still understood, but they picked a word that fitted as best as possible, but kept the understanding. And then later on, after the understanding gets lost, all that's left is the meaning of that particular word. I mean, we have the same problem right now. Orthodox Christians in the United States using English words from the Bible that means something quite different outside of the Orthodox context, like the word salvation, for instance. What does it mean to be saved? That means something very different if you're a Baptist versus if you're an Orthodox Christian, and yet they're both using the same word. Right.
Or even what we mean by grace is different if you're a Roman Catholic or a Protestant or a Orthodox Christian.
Yeah, exactly.
So you have this slippage. And so especially when you get to the point where there's nobody who knows Greek, you don't have easy access to someone who knows Greek. Because if you have someone who knows Greek, they could be like, oh, no, right? That Latin word was used for this Greek word, right? Sort of think about how regardless of your Christian religious background, right, you have probably heard sermons or read articles or read books where someone will take an English word in the Bible. They'll take an English translation of a Bible verse and they'll say, well, this English word is being used to translate this Greek word, which actually means more like XYZ, right?
Right.
Because the English word doesn't quite match. And that's fine if you have someone around who can read the original language and sort of keep correcting that, right? So that the concept is handed down generationally and the word doesn't mislead people.
Yeah.
The other factor you have, not only is no word a perfect translation for the concept, but words also change meaning over time.
Yeah. I mean, a great example, for instance, would be, John 1:1, right? Where anarchia and logos gets translated in English as in the beginning was the word. As long as you have some understanding of what logos means and you use the word, you're probably fine. But if you say, well, it says in the beginning was the word, and we know that this means Jesus, that means that Jesus is a word. He's just something that's said. Right? That would be that would be the kind of distortion that we're talking about, where all you have is the word, the later word, the translated word, and you've lost the original sense from the original.
Or people use the term word of God to refer to the Bible.
Yes, that's a really obvious good example.
Yeah, right. When you read that phrase, is that referring to the Bible? Because we use that terminology all the time now. Well, a lot of times if you're reading like St. John's Gospel, that's actually referring to the person of Jesus Christ, not to the Bible, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So words change their usage over time. And with Latin, we're talking about like 1600 years.
Yeah.
Right? And so words don't mean the same thing 1500 years later that they meant originally. Right? There's drift. And so you get this slippage. And so you go from Christians who are generally aware of the concepts and just expressing them in Latin to centuries and centuries and centuries and centuries later, Christians reading a Latin word in a text and reading a bunch of meaning back into it from the current usage of those words. Right? In the same way that sometimes people do with the English Bible. I don't know if I've told this story on this show before, but one of the worst sermons I've ever heard was a guy who was, he was doing his best. I'm not meaning to really pick on him. It's just this went horribly wrong. He was going one verse at a time, right?
Yeah.
This is not J. Vernon McGee, even though
expository preaching.
Right. But he's going with one verse at a time, which normally is fine, as long as you keep track of context, which is what's going to be the problem. He gets to the parable of the Good Samaritan. He reads the first verse. A certain man was going down to Jericho. Brethren, we need to be certain in our faith.
Oh, man.
Right. And see, that's what he'd done. Right. Now, if you know the Greek, you know that what's translated there, the King James as a certain man, is just some guy. Right.
Right. Some guy. There was once this guy.
Yeah. Right. But he was preaching from his English Bible. Didn't necessarily look up the Greek to see that. And the word certain, right, has this other meaning, right? That he read back into it.
And it's great. You mentioned also, that words, of course, change over time. Like another classic is in the original version of the King James, the word conversation is used in a number of places, I think in a number of places in the New Testament. St. Paul talks about your conversation. And now we use that word to mean like what you and I are having right now, that we're talking to each other. But in the 17th century, your conversation was the way you lived your life. So if you think it's only about how you talk to other people, then you're going to come up with a very different interpretation.
Right. Well, and I have recently, a certain Protestant apologist who I won't name, who is not a stupid man, but he made a similar mistake. He was reading the conclusions and the anathemas of the Seventh Ecumenical Council, where it anathematizes anyone who communicates with iconoclasts.
Oh, no.
And then he said, you're not even allowed to talk to them.
See? Wow. No, it
right?
means
And of
you
course,
can't have communion with them. Like you
right.
can't
You
have
don't share.
the body
You
and
don't
blood of
share
Christ
communion with them. You don't celebrate the Eucharist with them. Right. That's what it. Right. Yeah. That's what it originally meant. But communication now means, right?
Yeah.
Shared discourse, right? So these are all examples, right? And so happens a lot. This happens with these Latin translations later on, right? They are perfectly good, well done, incredibly well done, right? At the time they're done, right? But history then takes its course and you get this slippage, right? You get these shifts. But even at the time that some of these translations are done, right? So that's an issue of time and usage, right? But even at the time they're first done, there are some little shifts that happen, right? So in Greek, Orthodox listeners have probably heard this, other folks maybe not so much, but the distinction that is made in Orthodox theology between worship and veneration. Okay.
Yeah.
The Greek words are latreia for worship, which means service, right? And proskuneo, which proskuneo means to literally to bend the knee.
Yeah.
Like to bow down. Okay. And that's what we use for veneration. Okay. In Latin, the word for veneration is veneration.
Veneratio. Yeah.
Yeah. And the word for worship is adoremus.
Yeah. From which we get modern English adore. We adore.
Right. Adoration. Yeah. Here's the thing, though. Adoremus, the Latin word, etymologically, is from ora, to pray, and ad, to, or towards. So it means to pray to.
Yeah, etymologically.
Yes. Right?
Yeah, and the great thing, just to
Think that
muddy
might have
the
caused some
waters.
confusion in the Reformation?
Yeah, like just to muddy the waters, even in English, when you use the word worship, now most people, when they hear that word worship, they understand it to mean something to the effect of stuff you should do or you do towards God or a God. But the irony is that actually in most of the history of that word in English, it is referred to what we would call veneration. It comes from the word worth, sort of worthship, sort of to recognize the worthiness of another. And we still have a couple of echoes of that usage in modern English. So for instance, judges in the UK may be called your worship. And by that, no one means that they're offering religious sacrifices to them. And then, of course, also very famously, the Anglican wedding service includes the phrase, with my body, I thee worship, when the husband and wife talking to each other. And they do not, again, mean that they are treating one another as gods. They mean that they're showing respect and honor. But of course, now when we use that word worship, we typically mean by it something you do towards God alone. The question, of course, really is, what is the action that you are doing that you're using those words to describe?
Right. What is the concept that we're labeling with those words?
Yeah.
Right. And people fall into this thing a lot. A lot of the questions we get, right? I'm going to be nice and call them questions and not objections or something worse. They'll say, we'll make some distinction like that, right? And somebody will say, well, I found the word latreia, or I found the word worship in this hymn. Before that cross, I bow down and worship. Aha! Caught. Idolaters. Right? We are not, right? We are not ascribing to a word. I know this will hurt some people of a certain political persuasion in the United States, but words don't actually mean things.
Yeah, people mean things.
People mean things by the words they use.
Yeah.
you could fumble over words. You could use words incorrectly, right? But you're still trying to convey something. The meaning is in what you're trying to convey, not in the words you may mistakenly use if you use them incorrectly. And so when we're making that distinction, we're putting a label on the two halves of that distinction. But it doesn't matter what label you put. We can make up words, like they made up the word atonement, right? We can just make up bleep and blorp, right? Bleep is what you offer to God alone. Blorp is to give something the honor it's due.
Yeah.
Okay. We're just using the words to differentiate the concepts.
Yeah.
Okay. The words themselves are not super important. Okay. And if you think they are, you're going to have a real problem with once we tell you our next example.
Dun, dun, dun.
Okay. Because our next example comes from the terminology used for the doctrine of the Holy Trinity.
Yeah. Try to follow this closely if you can. This will be a little bit difficult, probably.
Okay. So there is a Latin word, substantia.
Yeah. From which we get modern English substance.
Right. And there is a Greek word, hypostasis.
Right. And
Okay.
Both of these words, in both their parts, etymologically mean the same thing. So sub in Latin, under, hypo in Greek, under, stantia, standing, stasis, standing. So literally standing under
The thing that
standing
stands
underneath.
yes.
Yeah, so these words are what they
So-
call calques of each other, that they literally, the parts all translate one for one.
Right. So you would think that when these two terms are applied theologically in Latin and Greek respectively, that you would translate hypostasis as substantia.
Right.
Wah, 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 wah.
Yeah, no, they're not.
The classical Greek, not the language classical Greek, but the classic framing of the doctrine of the Trinity in Greek is that God is one in ousia, and then there are three hypostases.
Yeah.
Whereas the classical framing in Latin is there is one substantia and three personae.
Yeah, so even though hypostasis and substantia literally, etymologically mean exactly the same thing, they're being used in very different ways in Greek and Latin theologically.
Yes, essentially opposite ways. Substantia is used in Latin for God's oneness, and in Greek, hypostasis is used for his threeness. To try and simplify it for people. Okay? So if you come from the words mean things squad, we got a real problem.
Yeah, no, it's not that words mean things. It's that words are used to mean things.
Right.
By people.
Right. Because here we have a very counterintuitive example of those labels being applied, right? That doesn't make sense under that understanding, right? But the conceptual idea of God's of the unity of God, right? The unity of the Godhead, of the divine nature, right? And the concept of the three persons of the Godhead, right? That concept is in both of those, but it is framed in different terminology. The terminology does not match up in any kind of direct or strict way between the Greek labels and the Latin labels, even though conceptually they're being used to talk about the same reality. Okay. Finally, this is the complicated one. The Greek word energeia versus the Latin actus. So in Aristotle, you find a distinction he makes between dynamis and energeia.
Okay. Which usually gets translated into English as something like power and energy, or energies.
Well, now, yes.
Yeah.
in the past, it was typically translated through Latin, right?
Oh, yeah, right.
That in and of itself caused an issue. And for Aristotle, these are ontological terms. These are metaphysical terms. These are two ways of being present. Okay. You could be present, right? And so his classical example is an architect, right? Even when an architect is not designing a building, he is still an architect, right? And so when he is not actually designing a building, he is an architect essentially in dynamis. He has the ability, the power, the potential, right, to design a building. And then that makes him an architect, right? There are also times when he is designing a building. Like he is in the action of designing a building, right? He is doing it.
Yeah.
Right. And that is when he is an architect in energeia. It is he himself designing a building. So he is an architect not because he is able to design a building. He is an architect because he is designing a building. Okay. That's the distinction he makes. Now, that second category, energeia, that term is used in the New Testament. That term is used in the Fathers. St. Basil makes great use of it, for example, and then becomes ultimately part of the essence and energies distinction in Orthodox theology as that gets elaborated fully. But energeia, right, when you used to talk about God, it is God himself present in action. Right? It is God godding. Right? And then you can distinguish the divine energies, right? So God creating. Right? We do not encounter God in his essence with all of these capabilities to do these things. We encounter him in action doing those things. Right? We don't encounter God in his essence, which you could talk about its relationship to love itself. We encounter God loving us and the rest of his creation. Right? That's very hard to distinguish in Latin. There's not a good Latin word for energeia. And so those terms, dynamis and energeia, get translated into Latin as potentia and actus. Okay. Potentia for dynamis, which is kind of a power and ability, right? And actus, which means something more like an effect. And these are not ontological or metaphysical categories per se in Latin. That's why I say they're not a great translation if you're going for just one-to-one correlation of the words. If you understand the concept, then it's a fine label to slap on it, right? But if you don't understand the concept, you're not going to get the concept from the Latin word. And so, because this is more like power and effect, right? A person possesses powers, possesses potentials, right? That can then be actualized. You could bring about an effect. You could use that power to bring about an effect, right? The architect has the ability to design a building. This is no longer about his identity as an architect or his presence as architect anymore. It is about he has this person has this ability, and then he could go and actualize that ability by actually designing a building. But actus does not refer to his presence in the process of designing the building, within the action of designing the building. It refers to the building he designs. or at least the design of the building that he produces. There's a produced effect. Okay. And we could do a whole episode just on this. Maybe we will someday. Who knows?
Who knows?
Because the way this affects, if you start thinking about it, the way this is going to affect Latin theology's view of ordination, of priests and bishops receiving powers, charisms, right? And powers that they can then use to do things, to bring about effects, right? Very different than the Orthodox understanding, participatory understanding based on the idea of energies, right? But we're not going to do a whole episode on that. We're just using this as another example here that we can go into further. But this is a particularly potent example, pun intended, because it is based on this distinction, once we lose sight of the original concepts on which these Latin labels were put, that you get the definition of God as actus purus, God as pure act.
Yeah.
Right. That he is not in the midst of any activity. Because that would imply change, or it would imply parts, it would imply separation within God.
Yeah,
and
I was going to say, you can see how, like, this idea of potential and act, which is in the Latin words, if you have this idea that God is pure act, that, in other words, that everything that he can do, he is doing.
He has done.
Has done. It's a pretty straight line from there to hardline deterministic Calvinism.
Right. And from that you get the idea that God is, all of God's attributes are identical with his essence. This is one of the things that's entailed by actus purus. Which causes lots of problems. But again, that's a whole episode unto itself. So the early Latin fathers, saints of the church, holy Christian men, understood the concepts apart from the Latin words. They understood the concepts that they were using the Latin words to express and communicate.
Right.
But Latin writers later on, centuries later, were dependent on just the words themselves.
Yeah, like an extreme version of this.
Concepts.
An extreme version of this is the KJV only Protestants, who have literally sacralized the King James Bible as being sort of handed down from God as it is exactly. In other words, they don't care what the words are translating because they have this English Bible and that's all there is. I'm not saying that the later Latin writers are doing that. I'm just saying it's an KJV onlyism is a sort of extreme version of that.
Yeah. Not later Latin writers. See, I'm going to be mean. See, I'm going to get accused of this anyway, so I'm not going to hold back. Trent basically does that. Right? Because sort of the mark of a true KJV only person, right? Because, there's people who just prefer the King James, right? For various reasons. I could empathize with them, right? Like it has a lot of things going for it as a translation, the English of it, and the poetry of it. Right. But the real King JV onlyist is the guy who thinks he can correct the Greek from the English.
Yes. I love those people so much.
Okay. Well, literally surrounding and post Trent, Rome said you could correct the Greek that was then circulating, like Erasmus's Greek, from the Latin.
Amazing.
Trent made the Latin Vulgate as it stood at Trent the biblical text.
By the way,
all its particulars.
I just have to break in just for fun. Because there's someone in the YouTube chat right now who doesn't believe that we're actually live because I'm talking to them in the YouTube chat at the same time. So, Sir Vilder, Yes, we're live. I'm talking to you, both in the chat and on the show.
Wilder, is this a Dutchman?
I don't know. It might be.
Any relationship to Geert?
I don't know. Let us know, Sir Wilder.
But yes, no, Father Andrew just doesn't pay attention while I talk. It has nothing to do with this being pre-recorded.
It's true. My attention does drift sometimes. You do go on.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I don't say I blame you. I'm just saying, you know, my attention drifts while I'm talking. Sometimes I lose my train of thought because I'm like, I get bored with what I'm saying and start thinking about something else.
I mean, it's great. And, in French, you bore yourself. Je m'en oui. Yeah.
That's why I have to keep drinking caffeine. So the first sort of major Latin theological writer, at least who gets credit, right, is Tertullian. And we all know he flakes out, goes and becomes a Montanist.
Yeah.
So that has nothing to do with the mountains. Has everything to do with Montanus.
I mean, his name means mountain, but yeah.
The crazed heretics. Right. Yeah, but I mean, much later in church history in the 19th century, you have within Roman Catholicism the Ultramontanists.
Ultramontanism, I know.
Yes.
Which does not mean you're
no
a super
connection
Montanist.
between these.
We should, I mean, I'm just going to put this as a request. We should do an episode on Montanism. And I mean,
the original.
Yeah, the original one, because it's before the 4th century, which you say you don't care about anything after the 4th century.
Oh, yeah.
That means you have to care about.
No, Montanus and his 2 female prophetesses who he traveled everywhere and stayed with.
I know.
Nothing sus. Anyway. But so Tertullian, started well, and then someone could cut in on him, and he flaked out. But his main claim to Latin linguistic fame is he's the first one that we know of to use the term Trinitas. The word that's used in Greek, of course, is trios, which means technically trio.
Yeah, triad.
But who we're really talking about, though, when we talk about who frames, and we've at least mentioned this in passing on the show before, who frames, not Roger Rabbit, but Latin theology, in terms of its terminology, pun intended, and the general scope of it is, of course, St. Augustine.
Yep, he's the guy.
And as we always say, despite accusations otherwise hither and yon, St. Augustine is a saint.
Yes.
Objectively, he is a saint of the Orthodox Church.
He is
commemorated on June 15th.
Yes, you can find him in actual Synaxaria.
Yes.
There's a canonical icon of him here in my studio.
Yes.
He's called a church father by ecumenical councils.
Yes. But really, here's the core thing, guys. If you want to know if someone is a saint in the Orthodox Church, are they in the Synaxaria? Are they on the calendar? If they are, they are. If they're not,
are
they're
they actually
not.
Being celebrated?
Purely objective. There is no subjectivity to this, right?
Yeah.
And objectively, St. Augustine is a saint. He is named a church father by the Fifth Ecumenical Council, right? So no shade is being thrown at him. He is the one who ends up creating most of the later Latin theological terminology. And by that, I don't mean necessarily he's the first one to use that word, a particular word in a theological context, Christian theological context, but that it's his usage. It's the way he applies those labels to concepts that gets picked up by later writers.
Yeah.
Part of that is for historical reasons. As we were talking about, if you think about, we were talking about that frame where people stop learning Greek and just know Latin. And St. Augustine is living during that time. So St. Augustine himself does not know Greek, right? His Greek is shoddy at best. He was to Greek as I am to singing. But he was in the church that was formed by those concepts. And so he understood the faith, right? But because of his lack of Greek knowledge, he's expressing it entirely in Latin, right? He's taking cues from Latin translations that he's reading, but he's also having to frame a lot of things himself. Okay? And so in St. Augustine, despite his lack of Greek knowledge, you still find that, as we were saying about the early Latin fathers, he is, by those Latin words, implying Greek terms. And if you read him that way, if you read St. Augustine as not implying later Latin meanings with his Latin words or later Latin usages, but implying the Greek Christian concepts, you can understand why the Church Fathers of the East, who read him during his life and thereafter, did not think he was teaching something radically different than them.
Right. They read him in context of, that period's theology in the church at large.
Yes. It's not because they were also teaching medieval Roman Catholicism or Calvinism. It's because they understood St. Augustine to be teaching the same thing they were teaching in Greek, just in Latin. Okay. That was their reading of him. Okay, and it's that reading of him that has him recognized as a saint, right? But later generations reading St. Augustine, right? And St. Augustine writes this voluminous amount of work in Latin, okay? And most of the rest of the church fathers are in Greek still in the late 4th and early 5th centuries.
Yep.
You got a few people like St. John Cassian and some of the later people, but you do not have a lot of Latin fathers. And so for subsequent generations who only know Latin, St. Augustine becomes their whole, he is the fathers, essentially, for a lot of future generations, right? The fathers is, 80 or 90% St. Augustine, and then some other writings. And that, of course, causes some of the slippage we were talking about, not in the sense that St. Augustine caused theology to go wrong, but that the slippage in language and in context, historical context, causes people to read St. Augustine differently over time. That said, if you want to hold St. Augustine guilty of something, that would be integrating Platonic metaphysics into Christianity.
Dun, dun, dun.
He is the one who does that. Some of the things like divine simplicity and stuff that we were just talking about do come in with St. Augustine and then become ubiquitous in the West. But in addition to just the word slippage, the word usage changing, all those things we've already talked about, people fail to read St. Augustine as a whole. They fail to read him systematically, and they fail to read him contextually. What do you mean they fail to read him contextually? Well, he retracted a lot of stuff that he wrote.
Right.
De Trinitate in its entirety, toward the end of his life, St. Augustine refused to have copies made because he said there was nothing in it worth reading.
Basically put it out of print, so to speak.
Yes. Nonetheless, De Trinitate became the basis for all Trinitarian theology in the West going forward. Okay. He also published his retractions. Right. This is one of many reasons to admire St. Augustine as a saint. Right. That takes a lot of humility after you've written a whole bunch at the end of your life to look back on it and essentially publish a book listing all the things you think you got wrong now in hindsight. Right? That's something, right?
I mean, why is it that of course there's other things he did retractions on as well, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So most, certainly not all, but the lion's share of his retractions actually come from his anti-Pelagian writings. Sorry, Calvinists. The stuff of his that they love most is the stuff where he basically says in his retractions, he kind of went to an opposite extreme in arguing against Pelagianism.
Oh, so
right?
A lot of the stuff that like hard predestinarians super love is exactly stuff where he's like, yeah, let's scratch that.
Yes. Whereas like that quote we gave a few episodes ago, he made in The City of God about astrology, saying that God does not control all wills. That statement was made 3 years before he died.
Yeah. Yeah.
So unless you think late St. Augustine is his dying utterances and everything else was retracted, that's pretty close to the end of his life.
Yeah. So the question is, why is it that these retractions are not more widely known, or just sort of get ignored?
Well, first of all, they're boring reading.
That's true. That would be like reading errata, for.
Yes, you're reading errata. Yeah. And there's, by the way, there's in relation to that other point, he did not retract a single word of his treatise on the freedom of the will. But, yeah, so they're not great reading. In order to really understand them, you have to have read all of the rest of St. Augustine.
Yeah.
Which pretty much no one has. Honestly, there's like, and I am not one of these people. I have not read all of St. Augustine. Not even close. I've read more than the average bear, but like, not close to all of it. There's maybe 5 like St. Augustine scholars in the world who have read all of St. Augustine. Like literally.
Yeah.
I mean, and so if you haven't read it all, you're not going to know what he's talking about in the retractions a chunk of the time, because he's referring to works you haven't read. And you're not going to know the context, right? So the retractions is really hard to read effectively, unless you have this really thoroughgoing knowledge of his works already going into it. But also, what ends up happening in the West, frankly, by the time you get to the Reformation, it's people pitting parts of St. Augustine against other parts of St. Augustine. So the Reformers, both the Lutherans and the Calvinists, right, are latching on to stuff from the Anti-Pelagian writings, soteriological stuff out of St. Augustine, and quoting him to back their positions. And Rome is latching on to his sacramental theology, his ecclesiology, the fact that he's a bishop and a monk, these kind of things, and arguing in the other direction, right? And so trying to have this sort of comprehensive understanding of the man himself, the saint himself, and what he understood and how he understood things at the end of his life was not nearly as useful as weaponizing quotations in an ongoing argument. So I think he's been done wrong. And because of that, he serves as kind of a test case. Right. The fact that you could have people with sort of radically different views on things, both grabbing stuff and quoting it. Right. This shows you how that original context of the late 4th and early 5th century and those Latin fathers is lost 1,000 years later by the time you get to the time of the Reformation.
Yeah.
I don't think I've done this on this show. I've only referenced it, so I will do this. I'll do this relatively quickly. Here's a test case on St. Augustine, right? St. Augustine, what St. Augustine himself, the saint, believed and taught about original sin is neither the later Roman Catholic view nor the later Protestant view. Okay. Because both of those hinge on different interpretations of essentially the concept of guilt. Okay. In fact, you will generally get both of those groups saying that St. Augustine taught original guilt. In the case of Luther and Calvin, they're going to argue that that guilt is essentially forensic, penal, criminal case guilt, right? Everyone is born guilty of Adam's crime, the penalty for which is eternity in hell, the penalty for which is spiritual death, okay? In that kind of structure, by the way, your own personal sin is kind of completely irrelevant, right? It's like getting convicted for multiple death sentences. Like you could only kind of go to hell once, right? So, whereas the understanding of guilt in Roman Catholicism is much more nuanced. We're going to get into that a little bit in the second half, right? But it is more in the context of a debt or a liability, which is actually closer to the word that St. Augustine actually uses in Latin. In Latin, he doesn't use the word that you would normally associate with guilt, the Latin word culpa, right? From which we get the English word culpable, right? Guilty, responsible, right? That's not the word he uses. And that is a word that St. Augustine uses. So, for example, in his Ode to the Paschal Candle, the only hymn or poem we have that he wrote, he uses the phrase famously, felix culpa, right? Oh, happy fault, right? Yeah. Oh, happy guilt, oh, happy sin, talking about Adam's fall into sin and calling it happy because it brought about so great a salvation. So he's capable of using that concept, culpa. He has that in his tool chest. That's not what he uses to describe what people inherited from Adam. What he uses to describe what people inherited from Adam is reatus. And reatus in Latin can mean a lack, a liability, an extreme of debt, right? So you can see the medieval Roman usage of it is closer to St. Augustine than the Protestant Reformation usage of the term, what they read back into it. But this is why it's a good test case here. It's not identical to the concept that St. Augustine was trying to express. And the way you can see that is, again, if you read some more St. Augustine. Because we have to say, okay, if we're saying that some element, something about the sin of Adam, because he doesn't just say every human being is born with Adam's sin. He says they're born with the reatus of Adam's sin. Something about Adam's sin, he's saying, is inherited by every person who is born on this earth. We have to look, if we want some clues into what St. Augustine means, we have to look at how St. Augustine views sin. St. Augustine does not view sin as a crime punishable by eternity in hell. It's not how he talks about sin. That doesn't work with his Platonic metaphysics. Okay? He doesn't even really talk about it in the sense of a literal debt that has to be repaid. He talks about sin as a privation, a metaphysical privation, a lack.
Yeah.
And so what you actually find is that St. Augustine talks about the effects of the fall in two closely related ways that show you what he means, what he believes human beings inherit. One of those is the grace that gets referred to later in Latin theology as the super Adamum bonum, that Adam is created, and Adam as created is participating in God's grace from the moment of his creation. Okay? When he is expelled from paradise, he is deprived of that grace, and he has to receive that grace anew. Okay. So part of what St. Augustine is saying is that every human who's born is born without that participation in God's grace, and they have to come to participate in God's grace anew, namely through baptism. That's why you have to baptize a baby. Second piece. So the second piece has to do with a Greek distinction we already talked about, dynamis and energia, because if you understand Aristotle's view of virtue, and you could go read the Nicomachean Ethics if you want to understand that better, but virtue, right, is an acquired property, right? It is an excellence, but it is an excellence found through exercising a power, a dynamis, that you have in an excellent way, right? I.e., you have if we're talking about humans and ethics, you as a human have the dynamis, the power to, right, love, to run, to jump, to think, right? If you do that excellently, if you do that well, and you do it well habitually, right, that is virtue, right? But for Aristotle, the fact that those things have to be habituated, those virtues have to be acquired, means that for every dynamis possessed by a nature, right? So let's use human still. By human nature, every dynamis also entails an adynamis.
A not potentiality.
Right.
Not
right. An impotency, right?
Yeah, not
the possibility that it will not be exercised at all, or will not be exercised excellently. Okay. And so the other piece for St. Augustine is trying to put this concept across as this privation. What is when you attach it to something in Greek? It is the alpha privative, right? Sin is a privation for St. Augustine, right? So now, right, Adam for St. Augustine is created excellent, right? He's created virtuous in all of his human powers, right? Now humans are born with this adynamis, this impotency, this, right, possibility that those will not be actualized. This propensity to decay, to err, to fail, weakness, right? Those are the two core things, if you really look at the way St. Augustine talks about this, right? Both of those things are the same things taught by the Greek fathers. That nowadays gets labeled as quote-unquote ancestral sin over against quote-unquote original sin. But frankly, if we're just talking about St. Augustine himself, he's not teaching anything different than the Greek fathers on this. But he comes to be read differently.
Yeah.
Later in history. And then radically differently by the time you get to the 16th century reformers. Right? Well beyond what he says. So we mentioned there's this period right after St. Augustine, these immediately subsequent generations where St. Augustine is the fathers.
Yeah.
And really...
kind of a bottleneck.
Right. And so this period of time is often referred to as the Platonic period in Latin theology. It's, starts with a figure like Boethius, right, who writes his own De Trinitate, which is basically notes on St. Augustine's De Trinitate. They're not identical, but I mean, he contributes things. But I mean, he's standing on St. Augustine's shoulders, right?
He's better known for his Consolation of Philosophy.
Right, which is overtly Platonic, right? And then goes to Anselm. I know everybody thinks satisfaction theory and atonement when they think of Anselm now because of Cur Deus Homo, but he also wrote the Proslogion and the Monologion. He wrote literal dialogues, right, like Plato-style dialogues. Remember, he also came up with the ontological argument for the existence of God, right? So Anselm was a figure who's deep in Platonic metaphysics in most of his works. So he's, sort of the last big figure. There are other figures, of course, after him that we're going to get to in the second half, but that's going to be sort of outside this Platonic period. And just as a fun fact, Father Andrew didn't know this. One of his interlocutors in one of his dialogues is named Bozo.
It's true. I did not know that.
Which is where the clown gets his name.
I hope that's true.
Because, there was Bozo, because, imagine the interlocutors in Plato's dialogues, right? They're all kind of dumb, right?
Right. Yeah.
So same kind of thing, right? And then finally, during this period, and we've mentioned this on the show before, but you can see already as you get into the 7th and 8th centuries in Latin theology, there start to be debates, and the debates have a particular character. So an example we've used on the show before that we'll use again now is the debate between Ratramnus and Radbertus on the Eucharist, where they were arguing about whether in the Eucharist it is Christ's crucified body and blood or his resurrected and glorified body and blood. Okay. And the reason this is a good example is it shows us the questions that are being asked in Latin theology in this period. The debate is about what the Eucharist is. And those debates are going to continue right into the Reformation, right? What the Eucharist is.
Yeah.
Rather than what you see in the East in treatises on the Eucharist, which talk about what the Eucharist does. Right? And part of that difference is that the concept of the Eucharist as a mystery, the concept of apophaticism, right? The idea of the transcendent, the idea that if there is a way that these things quote unquote work, it is concealed from all seekers, right? It is miraculous. It is beyond human understanding. The West becomes far more confident in human reason. There's a shift in how they understand reason. It's subtle at first. It takes a long time for this to finish happening. But even as late as Thomas Aquinas, you find Thomas Aquinas talks about the nous, essentially, using the word intellectum. But you very soon after that, you start getting some slippage in how intellectum is used. Meaning it isn't really pointing at the same concept as the Greek word nous anymore.
Yeah.
So there is this, and there comes to be this very confident view. We'll leave it here for this first half, because we're going to see how this develops in the second half. This very confident view about the ability of human reason to understand the details, the mechanisms of how God and salvation work.
All right. Well, we've just spent 80 minutes on basically late antiquity. We're not going to quite depart from it yet in the second half, but we're going to head into the Middle Ages. So we're going to take a little break.
Which I find much more boring, so we'll move quicker.
That's true. We're going to take a little break, and we'll be right back.
Father Andrew Stephen Damick and Father Stephen DeYoung will be back in a moment to take your calls on the next part of The Lord of Spirits. Give them a call at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO.
Ancient Near Eastern texts, such as the Baal cycle, portray the pagan god Baal as a rebel, the hero of a revolution, worshipped and glorified for his long string of victories. In The Baal Book, a biography of the devil, Father Stephen DeYoung shows that the Hebrew scriptures consciously turn the Baal story on its head, depicting him as a failed and defeated rebel who nonetheless tries to steal the glory that belongs to Almighty God. From these scriptures, the figure of the devil emerged within Jewish and Christian tradition. Father DeYoung works through the Old and New Testament passages that refer to various Baal stories, and he surveys Baal worship through followers' beliefs, religious practices, and liturgical life. In these pages, we will see that the figures of Baal and the devil, the prince of demons, are one and the same. To find this book and others like it, you can go to store.ancientfaith.com. Again, that is store.ancientfaith.com.
We're back now with the Lord of Spirits, with Father Andrew Stephen Damick and Father Stephen DeYoung. If you have a question, call now at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. We just spent 80 minutes talking about late antique developments in Latin theology. We're not going to quite leave that yet.
You're really focused on that 80-minute thing. Like, are you worried about your bedtime already? Is that what's going on?
Absolutely. No,
are you going to ride home on your ball cycle? That's
yeah. I'm just wondering if it might be. I don't think it's a record for a single half for us yet. I don't know actually.
Oh no,
but,
no. First halves go long a lot.
It's true. It's true. But we do actually have some calls.
Are they happy?
I don't know. We'll find out. But yeah,
I haven't gotten that meme yet. So
we have. So. I know. We have Eddie calling from Texas, and Eddie is wondering about, some of the words and stuff, the Greek and Latin words that we talked about in the first half. So, Eddie, welcome to the Lord of Spirits podcast.
Thank you for having me. So, Father DeYoung, you got me confused. I thought I knew what I was doing, and now you shook the foundations. I always thought, first off, I thought it was Latria, and now I found out it's Latrea, so I've been saying it wrong the whole time.
Wait, you said Latvia? Latvia?
No, Latria. Latria?
Oh, no, it's really Latria. Don't follow Father Stephen's Greek pronunciation. It's vaguely Erasmian.
No.
Okay, I thought it was Latria, and then he said Latrea, so then I felt like less of a man than I already feel like just normally.
Just listen to your local Greeks and how to pronounce Greek, buddy.
All vowels and diphthongs are E's. That's right. Go with it.
Yeah. So I thought it was Latria and Dulia, and then you threw in proskinesis. So how did those three words fit together is what was my question.
Well, go ahead, Father.
Latria and Dulia are kind of synonyms.
Yeah. I mean, like literally speaking, Latria is service, and Dulia is service like from a slave.
Is to serve, yeah.
Yeah. So they're kind of the same thing. And then proskinesis is, veneration, bowing, literally. Yeah.
So the Orthodox veneration is strictly there. Okay, because I had it explained to me wrong then, because I was told
it's about the concepts, not the words.
Right, but I was told Latria is the worship you give to God. Dulia is what we give to the saints. Am I totally wrong on that, or?
Well, so what I'm trying to say is that it's the concepts that are important. Don't get hung up on the words.
Yeah, the actual actions.
We could call it bleep and blorp.
Yeah, we put bread and wine on an altar to God. We bow, we name churches after, we make icons of saints. We sing their praises. But we do not give them sacrifices of bread and wine. You see the difference?
Because if you put all the emphasis on the words, like it takes just a few minutes searching to find some hymn or something where one of those Greek words is used differently.
Yeah, like for instance, in the feast on January 13th of the veneration of the chains of the Apostle Peter, there's a lot of translations of those texts where you can see where it says, "We worship your chains, O Peter," and it does not mean we're offering sacrifices to those chains. It just means we're kissing them, we're venerating them, we're showing them respect and honor. So the key thing is really the actions. And sometimes the words can slip around. Like proskinesis can sometimes get used to refer to worship. But the question is, what is the action being done?
Gotcha. And is it possible, can I slide in one extra little short question?
Sure.
I've talked to both of you independently on different podcasts, and now that I have you together, I would like to know, what would it take for you to watch Escape from New York, Father Damick? You need to see that movie.
Well, first, you'd have to pronounce my last name correctly.
Did I pronounce it incorrect?
I'm afraid so. So that means you've lost any chance of me watching the film.
I yell your name every time I hit my thumb with a hammer.
I know. When my dad was in the Navy, he used to say that he was never sure whether someone was cussing at him or calling his name because they would all mispronounce it.
No, I said Damick.
See, that's still wrong, buddy.
That's not correct. It's Damick.
It's Damick, like night and day, Mick.
Yes, as opposed to an Irishman at night.
Right. Exactly.
I'm a loser at life. You guys got me.
Man. I sometimes wish that my great-grandfather had left the name where it was, which was Domeka. But
yeah, that would be way easier to pronounce.
He apparently thought that Americans couldn't say that or whatever. I don't know. So we got Damick. It still has all the consonants are intact. He just did a number on the vowels. Oh well.
Well, I still think you need to see Escape from New York, and then we can revisit the issue down the road. Thank you so much for taking my question. I genuinely appreciate you too.
Thanks for calling, Eddie.
Yeah.
All right.
I think U2 is overrated. I prefer REM.
Wow, that is the spiciest take of the evening.
There you go.
So we have
How pompous do you have to be to call yourself the Edge and dress like a pilgrim all the time?
That's true. It's true. So we have Rachel calling from Walnut Creek, California, who says that she has an actually to deliver on the translation of a specific Greek word mentioned in a previous episode. So Rachel, are you ready to deliver your actually? Welcome to Lord of Spirits podcast.
Oh boy, can you hear me?
We hear you.
Hello? Okay, yeah. Well, I guess it's an actually. I was more just curious to hear where the source of in Genesis 3 in the garden that this Satan is described as a serpent, and I've heard Father Stephen say that the Greek word is drakon, dragon, and I can't find anything for that. Every version of the Septuagint or the Greek Old Testament that I can find says ophis. Like serpent, which just means serpent. So that was the thought there, and then I had a broader question about translation.
Okay, what did you say? Did you in fact say that, Father Stephen? And if so,
it's a textual variant.
A textual variant.
Yes.
Yeah, I think he has like next to all of his action figures on the shelf, which is real, by the way. There's photos of this. He has some.
Oh, you don't know the half, brother.
Right, I know.
You got to come down here and visit. Anyway.
I'm ready. Yeah, I mean, I'm all ready for Cajun food during Lent. But yeah, don't you have some like text somewhere, some massive volume that shows you every textual variation in like the Greek scripture?
Well, yeah, it's getting published. Yeah. Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have books that have photos of all the New Testament papyri. I have books that have, yeah. So yes, it is a textual variant.
Do you happen to remember offhand which manuscript tradition or whatever that was from?
No, I do not.
No, okay. Yeah.
No. But if I didn't say it was a textual variant, I should have.
Okay.
If I said that's just the word that's there in the Greek, then that would be an incorrect statement. So I would accept an actually on that.
Okay.
If that is what I said, but I don't remember what I said. So, but who knows?
You can go spend the points that you got for that actually, Rachel, at any good bookstore near you.
I will.
Okay. So what is your broader question?
I'll try to keep it brief. Basically, I've heard you guys talk about that in some ways, America is kind of like the new Babylon, the new Roman Empire. In a lot of ways, we are. One way I would say that we're maybe not is that we speak English, and at least in a lot of those, like Greek and Latin and stuff, there are an abundance of Orthodox texts in those languages. And, so far, at least that I'm aware of, there's not really a whole lot of English to that point. But I really just like, for us as native English speakers, is it incumbent, if we have a penchant for languages or anything like that, on us to learn these, Orthodox languages? I've heard you say that a lot of Orthodox texts are still not available in English. So should we just wait for someone to translate these? Should we take it on their word? Is it a good idea for us to go ahead and, try to understand it better that way? And the languages that we should be learning, I don't want to be spicy, but, I don't really understand, other than the scriptures, like Hebrew, really, like, it hasn't been an Orthodox language in like 2,000 years. So wouldn't it make a lot more sense to learn Greek, Slavic languages, Georgian, Romanian languages that, Orthodox people actually have used? So yeah, that would be.
Ooh, can I start with this one?
Yeah.
I will. Number one, like you started off saying that you did not think that comparing the United States to Babylon is a good comparison because there's not that many Orthodox texts in English. There's way more in English than there were in ancient Babylonian, or, languages they're speaking around that area. And Christianity has been in English in one form or another for 1,300, 1,400 years, something like that.
Humanist.
Yep. Honestly, I liked to mention this to some of my friends in seminary. Christianity arrived in English before it did in Slavonic. So, absolutely. The earliest English texts we have, the earliest English texts we have are all Christian, and they date from at least the 8th century, probably earlier, which is long before the conversion of the Rus, centuries earlier. Like St. Cadman's hymn is one of the earliest English text. It is possibly the earliest English poetry. There's another text called The Dream of the Rood, which might be a little earlier, but they're both 8th century at the latest, maybe 7th century. The question of Orthodox languages, I don't know what you do with that, because like there's a huge amount of variety in terms of languages that have had Orthodox theology in them for centuries. You got everything from, like Arabic and Georgian to Romanian to Slavonic to Greek, on and on. And yeah, of course, the presence of the church in those places can have a transformative effect on the language. But at the same time, like the form of Arabic that is used in the Divine Liturgy in the Middle East is essentially the same form of Arabic that is used in the Quran. So what do you do with that? Like, is Arabic an Orthodox language? I mean, it says in the Bible that Arabic is one of the languages that was heard at Pentecost, with the apostles there.
Right.
So I think the question is, if one is going to be a scholar, you should learn the language of whatever it is that you're studying. Absolutely. But the fact, let's say the only language you speak is English, that does not mean that you are cut off from understanding Orthodox Christianity. Now, you should probably hesitate to, say authoritative sounding things about certain matters, right? If you don't know like any Greek, for instance, which is probably the most useful language to learn in terms of Orthodox theology. But you're not cut off from, and you're certainly not cut off from being a saint. We have a newly canonized saint, Saint Olga Velasca. How much Greek do you think she knew? I'm not even sure how much Slavonic she would have known. even though I do know that they use Slavonic in some of the churches in Alaska, but she probably was worshiping in her own native language. I don't know. I'm just speculating off the top of my head, but she's a saint. So, yeah, I mean, it's good. It's absolutely great. Awesome to learn these other languages. But I don't think that, I think the idea that there's a sort of sacralization, like at what point do you consider a language to be an Orthodox language? Like when does that happen? How long does it have to be in that language and used for what? You know, I don't think there's a good answer to that. And even also there was early on, there was something, well, not super early on, there was something called the trilingual heresy, which is where some were actually preaching against the new invented Slavonic language, because they were saying, well, you know, Christianity really should only be expressed in Greek, Latin, or Hebrew, because those were the languages that were on the titulus that hung above Christ's head on the cross, which is nonsense. It's just nonsense.
Finally, a heresy I can get behind.
So, yeah. You know, language becomes holy by using it for holy purposes.
That's kind of what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, so English,
like languages that Orthodox people like use, have a history of using, and that have engaged with Orthodox theology in those languages, you know, to understand it from like an English speaker's perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, you know, if you attend church a lot and you read the scriptures and you listen to the preaching of your priest and the catechists in your parish, you're going to have a good understanding of what it is you need to know. You are. If you want to go beyond that, then yeah, maybe you should do some language study. And that's great. I mean, we need more people doing that. So that's
Allow me to give the Minority Report.
Go for it, Father.
Well, first of all, Arabic did not exist in the 1st century AD as a language.
Not as it exists now, that's for sure.
No, it didn't exist at all.
There was a, Proto-Semitic or whatever?
No, it was a dialect. They were speaking a dialect of Aramaic.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's doubtful whether Arabic even existed when the Quran was written. There's like a big debate about that.
Yeah, sure.
But also, in defense of Hebrew and Aramaic, you're not going to be able to understand the Bible in Greek unless you know some Hebrew and or Aramaic.
I agree.
Because it's full of Hebrew and Aramaic grammar, even though they're writing in Greek. You're not going to be able to learn Georgian without knowing some Aramaic. Syriac is a dialect of Aramaic. Mm-hmm. Arabic is essentially a spin-off.
The Georgian thing I'm not too sure about, because I do know some Georgian. I have no idea about Aramaic.
Well, there are segments of the church in Georgia that use Aramaic as a liturgical language.
Oh, I see. Okay.
That's what I was getting at.
And Georgia had early on extensive contacts with the Syriac/Aramaic speaking world. I mean, yeah. The earliest church in Georgia was actually under the Church of Antioch.
So Semitic languages, once you learn one, picking up others is relatively easy. So
you too can learn Ugaritic death curses.
Yeah. I mean, that one is an outlier, admittedly, right? Unless you're like super into Old Testament studies. Fair enough, skipping Ugaritic. But there is a lot of Christian Syriac literature that's untranslated. There's even a fair amount of Arabic Christian literature.
The majority of the church fathers are still untranslated.
Yeah. So those dipping your toes in Semitic languages is not unhelpful. But just in general, every American listening needs to hear this. One of the best things you can do in life in terms of enriching your life and broadening your understanding of things is learn another language.
Absolutely. Even if it's just to read it.
You know, I know there's a whole, this is Merca, talk Mercan, right? And because English is sort of spread everywhere, you don't have to learn another language. But people, because of that, deprive themselves of a lot of good things that come with learning another language. And if you're going to learn another language, why not, right? one of these Orthodox languages. And then, you know, once you've learned it, why not help with the translations?
Yep. I hope that helps, Rachel.
Yeah, thanks, guys. You're the best. God bless.
All righty. Thank you. Okay. We're going to take John, who's calling from Toronto. John has a question about pagan philosophy. John, welcome to
Deep in the heart of Canuckistan.
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Fathers. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you okay.
All right, Fathers blessed. Thank you so much for your show. My wife and I are huge fans. We really love it. It's replaced primetime television for us, so I think that's a huge compliment to how great the show is because we watch it every single day. So thank you again. My question is about.
You need to use that as a tagline that we're better than the CBC.
But, okay, don't get me started on the CBC. That might not be something in your favor. Okay. But right. You were a truly excellent show. So my question is about pagan philosophy. I'm trying to connect a few things that you mentioned on the show about the gods of the nations and about the pagan gods. So if I've been following and understanding correctly, the pagan gods are demons, right?
Yep.
And the pagans who wrote pagan literature and pagan philosophy were also deeply religious. People like Plato, they followed the religion of their time, right? So the basic thrust of it is, I guess from my perspective, like I came to Orthodoxy late in life, so I would say I did everything backwards. I studied the philosophy first and the religion second. And I regret that I spent so much time studying philosophy and didn't start with scripture and go the other direction. So now that I'm trying to kind of fix this in my life, why study pagan philosophy if you have not, mastered the Bible, mastered the Fathers? And I'm interested too, because I know from studying philosophy that there were many Orthodox people, obviously, who studied it as well, right? Like Basil wrote a letter about it. Eustathius wrote a huge commentary on the Iliad and the Odyssey in the Middle Ages. So there must be some reason to do it. I'm just trying to understand what it is, and that's my gap. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, a lot of the church fathers studied that stuff very closely and understood it. I think the best way is through, like what St. Justin Martyr says, for instance. It's essentially, he says, anything that's good or true belongs to us. Right. So this idea that, for instance, that if Plato says something that's good and it's true, it doesn't have cooties by virtue of his being a demon worshiping pagan. It's still good and true. Right. So, he himself said that he got a lot of benefit out of the various philosophical schools that he belonged to, which are essentially religious groups. Okay. So everything that's good is good and belongs to us Christians, as he would say. So that's the short response I would give. I don't know, Father, you have anything more or less or other?
Well, I think, so for example, Aristotle in his Organon, right, the categories, the prior, posterior analytics on interpretation, is basically teaching you how to think and how to use language with precision. That's why St. John of Damascus, the first part of his Fount of Wisdom, is his commentary on Aristotle's Organon, right? Defining theological terms. Here's what we mean by nature. Here's what we mean by this. Here's what we mean by that. Here's how you put together arguments. Here's how these things are constructed. I think that by itself, you've heard me probably often say how much, various scholars need to take a Logic 101 course. And that's a good Logic 101 course. So I think that there are elements of that, right, that are sort of critically important. Because if you don't understand those, you won't fully understand how the fathers are interpreting the scriptures and how they're making arguments and how they're putting these things together and how they're getting from point A to point B when they lay things out. So that alone, I think, justifies a certain amount, right? A certain amount of Greek philosophical education. I think in the abstract, the pre-Socratics, even Plato, are actually far less helpful. But a lot of the categories in Aristotle are so important to understanding Orthodox theology because they are the undergirding of just how you think and how you argue and how you structure things, that I think they're kind of necessary. Not to understand the Bible, but to understand the Fathers and how the Fathers understand the Bible, which we hold is the correct way to understand the Bible.
Yeah. Yeah. Does that help, John?
That does help. If I can add one quick clarifying question. So if we kind of follow pagan philosophy through to modern times, are there writers that are dangerous to read? Like Nietzsche is often read by many people as a heuristic, as a source of ideas to apply to other things. But some of Nietzsche's ideas are pretty disturbing and very anti-Christian. Is there any value in reading someone like Nietzsche?
Oh, man, don't get him started on Nietzsche. Don't you read it every Lent, Father?
Lent's about to start, yeah. Yeah, I've read Nietzsche every Lent for decades now. But that doesn't mean I recommend everybody go and read Nietzsche, because
yeah, right.
most people who read Nietzsche read him really badly. Treat Nietzsche and understand what Nietzsche's trying to do even. And it's definitely not all good, what he's trying to do. But to even understand what he's trying to do and be able to assess the good and the bad, you have to be pretty well versed in Hegel, which is a gymnastic feat all to itself. You need some Dostoevsky. You need some Schopenhauer. I don't recommend reading Schopenhauer to anyone. All of life is suffering, but especially reading Schopenhauer. So I mean, it's definitely not for everybody. And Nietzsche in particular, there's not like a bunch of other Nietzsches, right? Like I could say, if Hegel you really can't understand without a good teacher, because he writes obtusely. That can be helpful in terms of understanding. I mean, we're going to talk later on in this episode, in the third half, understanding certain social and societal movements and things, right? There are ways in which reading some of that modern philosophical stuff, you could say, oh, that's what's going on with that movement over there, or that school of thought, right? So it can be helpful in that kind of way. Nietzsche really doesn't work that way. In that most of the stuff that's quote unquote inspired by Nietzsche is inspired by some weird bad reading of Nietzsche. So actually reading and understanding him doesn't help you understand that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for calling, John. All right. We're going to take one more call. We've got Nicholas.
Just have to wait for Jordan Peterson to get out of the hospital and talk about Nietzsche with him, I guess.
Oh boy. We're going to take one more call. I've got Nicholas calling from the state to my east, the Garden State itself, New Jersey. Nicholas, welcome to Lord of Spirits podcast.
Thank you, fathers, for having me on.
Yes, you're welcome.
Yes, what's it called? I have a question. Since you're talking about the word concept fallacy, and we live in the English-speaking world, a lot of the Bibles we have in English are, at least from my perspective, have a very heavily Protestant bent. And so do you guys have any recommendations for Bible translations that try to mitigate that perspective, if you will? Because I know you brought up before the words like latria and proskinesis, and then energia. So I've only come across maybe 2 Orthodox translations that make attempts to try to bring those concepts forth. So I'm open to hearing what you guys have to say about that.
This is your forte, Father. Give your spiel on Bible translations.
Yeah. So, if you aren't going to be learning biblical languages, or at least not anytime soon, I always recommend to people the NET Bible, as long as you get the full notes edition. The translation is not that great, but if you get the full notes edition, like most of the page is notes. There's like a little box of translation, and then like the whole rest of the page is 2 columns of notes. And the notes are not like study Bible notes interpreting it. They're translator's notes about the original language that's behind the English translation. So it'll give you all the information about, right, here's the Hebrew words, here's how the Greek has it, here's how the Syriac has it, here's how the Latin has it, right, in those notes. So you can kind of get back behind the translation a little bit without learning other languages that way. And since the NET Bible, again, you got to get the full notes edition because you want the notes more than the translation. It's in the public domain, so you can get it cheap. Like you could get a hardcover copy for like $25 online. You could get like a leather bound one for like 50 or 60.
The Net Bible?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's you can go to netbible.org and read all the notes. It's all.
Yeah, you can just download it all. Yeah. And like have it digitally for free. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you want a printed copy because you're like me, then, you know, you can get it cheap because it's public domain. Anybody who wants to can print one. And then, you know, the Eastern Orthodox Bible is fine. It's, you know, I mean, I don't think it makes a radical difference over most other English New Testaments, but it's fine. They're going to be coming out with a book that's going to bind together the Lexham English Septuagint, which is a good English translation of the Greek, even though the canon list in it is a little wonky. And the Eastern Orthodox Bible, New Testament. So I'll probably get one of those when it comes out. That'll be a nice thing just for your day-to-day, do the readings, you know, kind of use. But yeah, that's...
Yeah. All right.
Is Ancient Faith going to get mad at me for that?
No.
Oh, okay.
I mean, we do publish your book, The Whole Counsel of God, which has basically everything you said and lots more at the end of it. So
that's true. That is true.
Yeah. So, all right, Nicholas, thank you very much for calling. All right, well, we're going to move on. Where are we? Middle Ages.
Well, you are in Emmaus, Pennsylvania, I believe.
Oh, there was. See, now you.
I know we're getting late. We're getting late.
There was some guy in the chat who kept asking me, like, what town are you located in? Where are you? And I was like, that seems a little.
Oh, did I just dox you?
Stop asking. You doxed me, man. Actually, everyone knows exactly where I live.
Yeah. Is this gonna be like What About Bob? Is this gonna be?
I have to tell you though, I'm kind of excited about moving because the area in the Raleigh area that we're looking at moving to. There is an unincorporated like town or village or whatever it might be that is actually quite famous. And I'm really hoping that I can get my new studio located there so that I can tell everyone that I will be coming to them from Lizard Lick, North Carolina, because it is a real place that I could be living in or near in the near future. So everybody pray that my studio can be located in Lizard Lick, North Carolina, because that would be awesome. So great.
There you go.
Yes.
I still remember there's a sign in Cross Lanes, West Virginia that says they're the largest unincorporated area in the United States.
Mm.
I said, wow, here's the biggest group of people who can't get their act together. And they're proud of it. No trash pickup for us. Thank you very much. So now we come to the middle half of the show.
Indeed.
And the Middle Ages. See, that's a segue again. See how I did?
Nice.
Yeah. And so as we get into really the high medieval period, Latin theology completes this turn towards soteriology. the doctrine of God at that point is kind of fully enshrined in Latin theology in Platonic terms. When you read the authors of the period, there's not a ton of difference on the way they express the doctrine of God. And that's coming from St. Augustine through some of the intermediaries we talked about. But that's pretty much firmed down. And so there is a move of focus to anthropology and soteriology. We already mentioned that a little when we were talking about how Anselm wrote not only the Proslogion and Monologion, but Cur Deus Homo, right? Why the God-man, on atonement. So even though this shift sort of fully happens at this point, it really started earlier. It's picking up a thread that began much earlier in the history of Latin theology, and that began with the whole issue with Pelagianism. Pelagius was a British monk, that great early English-speaking Christianity that Father Andrew was just going on about.
It's true.
Gave us Pelagius.
Do you know what Jerome said about him?
I'm sure he said a lot of things, but which one in particular?
Yeah. Well, I mean, of all the church fathers, St. Jerome is the man in terms of hilarious insults.
Yes.
And what he said about Pelagius is that he came up with his heresy because he was too full, and this is how it usually gets translated in English, too full of Scottish porridge, which I have decided means that this is a man who came up with a heresy where you literally did not need the help of God to be saved because you've been eating haggis.
Yes.
It's got to be true.
The fact that you've been able to successfully consume and live on haggis would give you a kind of overconfidence in human ability.
That's exactly right.
To eat that much of it and not die.
Did they even have the neeps and tatties in those days? I don't know. Yes. But I do recommend the neeps and tatties next time you have haggis.
So, so he becomes sort of an itinerant preacher. And, the log line of his preaching is that he is preaching moral theology. He's trying to bring about moral revival, as it were, among Christians in the early 5th century. Now that Christianity has become the religion of the empire, now that it has become fashionable and advantageous to become a Christian, there are a lot of folks in churches who are not sort of fully committed to living Christian lives, right? So he is going to come and improve the morals of the church. Tertullian was all about that too. So just a note, a historical note, because history tends to repeat itself. When you see people who the focus of their preaching and their message is primarily on morals, a lot of times down the road, there ends up being an issue.
Yeah.
So just something I've seen.
Yeah.
Half a century on this earth. So Pelagius does this, and in arguing for sort of rhetorically, in his rhetoric, toward increasing people's sense of, frankly, guilt, of culpability, right, for sin, and trying to drive them to repentance and urge them on to living a moral life, several people, including most notably St. Augustine, think he is going a bit too far in terms of how he talks about human capability to work out your own salvation without the assistance of God. And so St. Augustine tries to handle this through the proper channels. He finds out that Pelagius is within the territory of the Bishop of Jerusalem. So he has the Holy Synod of Jerusalem pull him in and examine him for heresy. Here's the problem. There's only been 2 ecumenical councils. And so the bishops only ask him about the doctrine of the Trinity, which wasn't the issue. So they clear him. They say, he's not a heretic. He's not an Arian. St. Augustine goes, no, that wasn't the point. Right. And so what comes to be known as Pelagianism, right? And this is a broader thing. You know, you get these modern folks sometimes who want to say, you know, Nestorius wasn't a Nestorian and Pelagius wasn't a Pelagian and blah, 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 right? Fine, you know, whatever. But you have to understand that when the councils, especially after the first two, when the councils condemn something, certainly Pelagius had some followers and disciples like Celestius who went further than him, right, on these things. But they had learned from Arianism that when you condemn very specifically one guy's view, you're going to have a whole bunch of other guys show up with similar views who are going to say, well, no, I don't technically have that precise view, so I'm okay, even though your view is very similar. That's the semi-Arians, right, who had to be dealt with at the Second Ecumenical Council. And so at the Second Ecumenical Council and the following councils, when there's a problem, they say, okay, what are all the variations we can think of this bad idea? We're going to condemn all of those. And what are the consequences of these bad ideas? We're going to condemn all of those. What are the presuppositions that would lead you to these bad ideas? We're going to condemn those too. That doesn't necessarily mean that any given figure who held to a form of that heresy held to all of that, right? In fact, it's unlikely that any one person held to all that, because sometimes the things they condemn don't fit together. They're like variations where you'd only hold to one of them, right? Logically. But the idea is, these are ideas that are dangerous for human salvation. These are ideas that if you follow through on them will endanger your salvation. And so the councils are warning you away from them. They're putting up a fence between you and that whole area, right, to keep you away from it. So the question of what elements of this the historical Pelagius held isn't totally relevant to the condemnation, right? But broadly speaking, for a quick definition, since Father Andrew needs to get to sleep sometime soon.
Wait, what?
Exactly. Is that Pelagianism is the view that divine grace, the action of God, is not necessary for salvation. He did not deny the existence of grace. He did not deny the forgiveness of sins, right? Pelagians do not deny that these things are there. They just deny that they're necessary. Right. And in some variations, this gets down to, like at the Second Council of Orange, this gets down to the detail of the fact that God acts first. Right. God acts first. God acts. God saves. To put it in very short form, God saves you. Right. And you cooperate with God in your salvation.
Yeah.
Okay. Whereas in various forms of Pelagianism, the activity is shifted away from God and toward the individual person. So the way Pelagianism ends up getting condemned at the Third Ecumenical Council, because you're like, wait, I thought that was about Nestorius. It was. By the time you get to the Council of Ephesus, St. Augustine has departed this life. St. Augustine passed away a year before the council. So through a long confluence of events, St. John Cassian was in and around Rome at the time. And the man who at that point was Archdeacon Leo, that point in church history, the Archdeacon of the city of Rome was sort of the on-deck circle for the next Bishop of Rome. So the next Pope was generally made the Archdeacon of Rome preceding it. And this Archdeacon Leo is the man who became Saint Leo, the Great, as the Bishop of Rome. But he was friends with St. John Cassian, had St. John Cassian write a treatise against Nestorius to represent Rome's position on Nestorius and his deposition to take to the Council of Ephesus. And in that treatise, St. John Cassian connected Pelagianism with Nestorianism. He argued, and so St. John Cassian had come from the East, as most of the Eastern Fathers do. His understanding of soteriology flowed directly from his Christology. So he says, in Christ, as Christ works out our salvation, in Christ, his human and divine energies are in perfect cooperation. Perfect cooperation. And therefore, in our salvation, the grace of God, the divine energies, and human energy are in cooperation, are in perfect cooperation. And so by separating human activity from God's grace, by holding those apart, Pelagius and the Pelagians are de facto separating the divine and human natures in Christ. And therefore, they are essentially Nestorians. And that's how he gets roped in. That's how Pelagius gets roped into the Third Ecumenical Council for condemnation. Let me add, as is my wont, that semi-Pelagianism is not a thing, you guys. Semi-Pelagianism is man, bear, pig. It is something the Calvinists invented in the 16th and 17th centuries to call their enemies as a slur. It does not correspond to any historical belief, especially not St. John Cassian, who gets labeled as that by the Reformers.
Yeah.
In a twist of irony, since he's the one who got Pelagius condemned. So, but within the context of these discussions, terms get used, some Latin terms again, that become very important in later developments of Latin theology. One of those is grace, gratia, right? And one of those is merit. And so within the context of these discussions surrounding Pelagianism, merit is the term that's used for human action, human activity, human energeia, or in Latin at this point, human actus, right? Even though, as we've said, that's a flawed translation. And grace is being used for divine action, divine energeia, right? Divine actus in the Latin translation. And so, for example, at the Second Council of Orange, the major question decided by the council is, can you merit first grace? Now, when you hear that as a modern person, especially if you're like here in the U.S. or in the rest of the Anglophone world that's been deeply colored by Protestantism, you hear, oh, can you earn grace? Is probably what you think that means.
Yeah.
Right? Can you merit first grace? So first grace, in this case, is baptism. Right? Because baptism, when you baptize infants especially, right, that's the first sort of partaking of God's grace that you receive, as we were talking about with St. Augustine. Can you merit that? That doesn't mean earn. That means, can human activity bring you to that? Meaning, in terms of your salvation, do humans act first or does God act first? That's the question they're deciding. Now, the decision, of course, is that no, God acts first. And then humans respond. Okay. So there's nothing anywhere there about earning anything. And Pelagius did not say anything about earning anything. This idea of earning salvation through some means is nowhere actually in any of these discussions. Right? Pelagius just thought that the effects of Adam's expulsion from paradise were very minimal, so that a person could, by their own determination and their own habituation, form the virtues, right, of love, right, of faith, of hope within themselves, right, with minimal, right, assistance from God. God stepped in when, oh, you messed up, you sinned, okay, forgiveness, right, but then you get back on track and it's your own efforts. That's Pelagianism. That's still not earning your salvation, guys. Right? That's still not, that idea wasn't there.
Yeah.
Right? The idea that especially keeping the Torah somehow would earn you your salvation. It just doesn't exist at this point in history, in Latin theology even.
Right.
So that's sort of the beginning of soteriological discussions within Latin theology. But as we said, once we get into the Middle Ages, sort of Latin theology as a whole sort of starts to turn in that direction. One of the most important figures, if you're going to talk about the sort of next phase of Latin theology, is Peter Lombard. Lombard was not like his last name.
No, he was Lombardy.
He was a Lombard. Yeah.
Yeah, Peter the Lombard, basically.
And he's living in the middle of the 12th century. And he writes a work called The Sentences. Okay. This is not the first work called The Sentences, but it's a very important one. The earlier works called The Sentences are essentially florilegia, meaning collections of quotations from Christian church fathers, from the scriptures, from councils, right? All pulled together. His is an important watermark because he sort of does that in a more systemic and comprehensive way in his sentences. And so he pulls all of that together into one place. Probably the closest equivalent, because it's also set up as a basic work of theology, like the first part of St. John of Damascus' Fount of Wisdom that we mentioned, with his commentary on Aristotle's Organon and the categories in particular. Also, it's even a little bit like some of the early stages of the Philokalia, although less. It's got the characteristics of Latin theology by now. Right. So whereas the Philokalia is very much aimed toward prayer in an apophatic way, the sentences are aimed more toward theological reasoning. Right. And theological reasoning is not bad. Like I said, St. John of Damascus, right? It's a similar kind of thing there. It's not bad, just different. And that becomes such a formative work that throughout then the next few centuries in the Middle Ages, at universities, at the newly founded universities in Europe, people are going there and studying the sentences, and it becomes very common for new budding theological writers to write commentaries on the sentences, on Lombard sentences. But probably the biggest theological idea that comes out of Lombard sentences in terms of the flow of Latin theology is he is the first one to make the distinction between the sufficiency and the efficiency of Christ's work. And in this case, we're post Cur Deus Homo, and so in the West, more and more, Christ's saving work has not completely been narrowed, but has been, shall we say, focused on the cross, rather than the incarnation and his life as a whole particularly the cross and then the resurrection, but the cross in particular has become sort of the focal point of the understanding of Christ's work. And so for him, the importance of this distinction is, first of all, we have to say, right, that Christ's saving work, right, and now if we're in this Latin theology mode where we're focusing on the cross, he would not have to do something more in order for one more person to find salvation. Right. So there's a certain number of people who are going to find salvation. It's not going to be everybody. There's a certain number, but for one more than that to find salvation, he wouldn't need to do anything. Okay, so what Christ has done is sufficient to save anyone and everyone. At the same time, right, universalism has been rejected as heresy, and so it is not going to be efficient. It is not going to be effective. It is not going to effectively save everyone, right? It is going to only effectively save a subset of people. Now, you may have noticed, if you know something about Calvinism, Calvin has a very different way around this, right? So technically, under Calvinism and their view of limited atonement, Christ would have to do something different to save one more person, because he only died for the sins of the elect from a subset of people. And therefore, he collapses sufficiency and efficiency, essentially. But Lombard makes this distinction, and it becomes critically important. So then, the soteriological discussion becomes, in the West, in Latin theology.
How dare you, sir?
I know.
I'm still vigilant over here. You think I'm taking a nap, but I'm not.
How do you get then, right, from Christ's work, which is sufficient to save you, to you actually being effectively saved, right? To your salvation being accomplished for yourself, right? And so the term that gets repurposed, right, and you're going to see a shift in meaning here, the term that gets repurposed is merit.
Okay.
And it's only a slight repurposing, because as we talked about, right, merit before was being used to talk about human action. Okay. It's being used here to talk about Christ's action and what Christ accomplishes as man, right? Cur Deus homo, right? Accomplishes as man, accomplishes in the incarnation, accomplishes in the atonement, right? Accomplishes in working our salvation. So we're talking about Christ's merit. And then that merit is seen as a sort of mediatory element. Christ's work, what Christ does, his suffering in particular, throughout his life, and especially at the cross, that produces merit, right? And that merit then is applied to people for their salvation, to humans for their salvation. Okay. So we're sort of it's mediating between the universal and the limited, right? Between what, Calvinist B.B. Warfield will call redemption accomplished and applied, right? But there's a couple side effects of seeing it this way. So merit has to be quantifiable, right? What do I mean by that? Well, it has to be quantifiable because it's not applied to everybody. Right? It has to be a thing. It can't be this infinite thing, because if it's a truly infinite thing, then it would just overflow to everyone, right? So it has to be quantifiable. It has to be containable, right? It has to be finite in some sense to be able to be moved to some people and not others. It has to be created in some sense, right? That it's not eternal. It's sort of produced, right, by what Christ does on the cross. It doesn't sort of always exist, right? In the merits of Christ. This understanding of merit and its relationship to grace, to God's action, right, then is going to lead to a shift in the view of what sin is, right? So here's part of where we see the idea of sin as debt more firmly taking shape, right, in a sort of more literal sense of debt. And so it's sort of demerit, right? You have merit and demerit, credit and debit, right? Notice, however, it's still not juridical guilt.
Yeah. Yep.
It's still not like criminal charges, right? And so the understanding comes to be in the medieval period in Latin theology that there are a series of deposits, right, from Christ into you, right? Sort of infusions, right, at various points of this merit that forgives sins, takes care of demerit, right, and then works salvation, right, within a person. That happens through, right, the sacraments, beginning with baptism and then receiving the Eucharist. That happens when you do things like go on pilgrimages, when you do penance, when you do acts of faithfulness, acts of love and charity toward people, right? You receive these sort of infusions of grace. Now, again, right, a lot of Protestant later dogmatics are going to say, well, this is earning your salvation. Technically, that is not what Latin theology is saying, right? So there is this distinction that's made of two types of merit: condign merit and congruent merit. Condign merit is when God owes you his grace. Now that sounds crazy right off the bat, but the reason God would owe it to you is that he promised it to you. Right?
Right.
So God has promised that baptism will bring about the forgiveness of sins. Therefore, if you are baptized for the forgiveness of your sins, you will receive the forgiveness of your sins from God, right? He's only required to do that in the sense that he promised to do it and he keeps his promises. Okay? That's condign merit. Congruent merit is merit that's given to you freely, that God didn't necessarily promise to give you, but you did something that made it appropriate or made yourself worthy to receive it sort of as a gift. So this would be doing acts of kindness to others, acts of love and charity, for which there was no sort of explicit promise, right, to receive grace anywhere. Then salvation happens, right, at the point where there's sort of a bar, there's sort of a level, right? And when you have a level of merit, when you have a level of grace that you've received that reaches that bar and is above the bar, you are in a state of grace. And if you die at that point, you go to heaven. If you are below that bar because of mortal sin or just because you never got close to it because you didn't do anything good in your miserable life or whatever, then you go to hell. You go to eternal hell. It is possible for someone within this system to be in a state of grace. So be at the point where your salvation has been worked out and you're ready to go to heaven, and you continue to do good deeds. This would be the Latin theological understanding of saints, right? Saints are people who not only entered into that state of grace, but then through their continued lives and receiving the grace of God, these things had sort of extra. That is put into the treasure house of the merit of the saints. The Pope has the keys to that. It's in an Al Gore style lockbox. Wow. It's a
26-year-old joke.
Yeah, he could dole that out, right, for the forgiveness of sins. This is probably my favorite of Luther's 95 Theses. If the Pope could do that, why doesn't he just forgive everybody's sins?
I mean, it is a very good question.
Good question, Marty.
Brother Martin.
Yes. So now the way we've just described it, and we're doing it quickly, right? You could read that as this very crude kind of banking metaphor taken literally. Okay. Right. Of like withdrawals and deposits and debits and credits and this and that. Right. You get to a certain balance and okay, now you're good. And right. You can take it rather crudely. And the reality is, and I know there'll be some Roman Catholic folks who get mad at me, but the reality is part of what brought about the Protestant Reformation, honestly, is that your average peasant in Western Europe understood it in that crude way.
Yeah.
And there were people like Tetzel taking advantage of them in that crude way.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was a popular understanding. Yes, that's never the way that, you know, bishops and highly educated churchmen understood it, but that is the way a lot of common people understood it. And again, to give credit to Rome, where it's due, the Counter-Reformation backs away from a lot of the very literal, crude versions of this.
But
right?
It's worth noting that this idea that there is this treasure house of merit.
It's still a thing.
It is absolutely still a thing. You can go on the Vatican website, which, if that doesn't speak authoritatively for the Roman Catholic Church, I don't know what does.
People say it doesn't, so, you know.
I know. That's amazing to me.
Yeah.
I'm like, y'all Vatican I'd yourself into this. I don't know what to tell you. Anyway.
Vatican I is a verb.
There we go. I feel like it works. Yeah, if you look at the Catechism of the Catholic Church, 1474 and following, you can see all that stuff. And various other places too. So not making this up. Not
is it the
obsolete.
Vatican or the Vaticant? That's what I want to know.
Vaticaniption.
Yeah. Yeah. And so then another key element of this that we can't leave out is the distinction between eternal and temporal guilt, right? So guilt as liability, as debt here takes on two kinds. And this is still Roman Catholic theology. I'm sorry, it is. There is eternal guilt that's taken care of by Christ directly. Right. And then there is temporal guilt. Temporal guilt is built off of the idea. It is sort of a formalization or a mechanization or a making transactional of the idea of repentance as dealing with the consequence, accepting and dealing with the consequences of your sin in this world. And so that is turned into this formal thing of temporal guilt, which the same way Christ's suffering takes care of eternal guilt, your suffering, or grace and merit from saints who suffered, right, etc., take care of that temporal guilt. If you have temporal guilt, if you have eternal guilt when you die, you go to hell. If you have just temporal guilt left, then you go to purgatory to pay off the rest of it. Okay. And I know, once again, Roman Catholic Church has done a whole lot of backpedaling from the very crude way purgatory used to be understood. But purgatory was understood in that crude way very recently.
Yeah,
we have the receipts, folks.
Yes, I mean, like an example that I always think of back when I was in university, when I was half the age that I am now, I had a Catholic girlfriend for a while, and she showed me her gigantic Catholic Bible.
Were you trying to kill your parents with grief? Evangelical boy.
You know, I don't remember them ever objecting to her religion.
Oh.
I don't know. I don't, it's been so long, Father. I don't even remember if we discussed it, but she had this big Catholic Bible, and in the front of it, I mean, this was like a real Catholic Bible, the whole, you know, Neil Obstadt, all that kind of stuff was in there.
Weighed 50
and it had this,
pounds. Took up a whole coffee table.
It was huge. Yeah, it was a huge volume. I mean, I love a big Bible. And anyways, the front of it had this.
And you cannot lie.
Thank you. The front of it had this chart in it. And it said, if you read the Bible for this many minutes, then you get this amount of time out of purgatory. Like, it was a chart with numbers. You know, so like, I know, you know, probably your average Roman Catholic here in 2026 does not believe that kind of quantification. Maybe, I assume, but I mean, it not that long ago, it was definitely believed, and you can't say, oh, it was always a metaphor. You wouldn't have charts like that, and like there's sometimes it's almost freakishly precise in some of the language. For many, many centuries, it was this way. And I mean, I'm glad they've gotten away from that. Like, let's just go the whole way and dump purgatory entirely. But hey, you know, we're making some progress here. Anyway.
Yes. So yes, you have to, you know, good that you're backing away from it. You still have to own it historically. So yeah, and sort of this period of Latin theology ends up getting summed up, pun fully intended, by Thomas Aquinas, who, interestingly, you know, he lives in the 13th century, not very important during his life, actually, his works and everything. He doesn't finish his Summa before he dies. Tertius Partus gets put together from notes at his monastery. But he did that as a work of basic theology. That was the intro. That was the 101 level. But he sort of becomes the image of this period at the Council of Trent. The Council of Trent sort of enshrines the theology of Thomas Aquinas as part of the Counter-Reformation, as sort of the basic explication of Latin theology. During his day, he was actually more concerned with the controversies of his day involving the recovery of Aristotle and the Latin Averroes. I'll take mercy on Father Andrew and not go into all that right now. It's he's nodding. I can see him nodding in my head. But so he sort of becomes emblematic of that. But to sum up this second half, I think you can see that some of the trends we saw in the first half are now sort of fully coming to fruition. Faith as it's being practiced, right? For sure as it's being practiced, and arguably as it's being laid out, has become very transactional, mechanical. There's a way these things all work. We have an ontology of the universe that includes God and rocks, right, in one chain of being. We're sort of, you know, we're not at modern science's attempt to explain everything, but we're at theological science's attempt to explain everything, right? The idea that you could have a cohesive view of the entire cosmos and understand it all, right, by a mix of God's revelation, Aristotle's logic, and Platonic metaphysical categories, is thoroughly in the view of the scholastic mind. And as you probably know, in the 16th century, stuff's gonna happen.
Yes.
So we'll get to that in the third half.
On that cliffhanger, we're going to take our second break, and we'll be right back with this completely uncontroversial episode of The Lord of Spirits.
Father Andrew Stephen Damick and Father Stephen DeYoung will be back in a moment to take your calls on the next part of The Lord of Spirits. Give them a call at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO.
The Book of Lamentations was written after the Babylonians had invaded the land, slaughtered the populace, and brought about national extinction. What remained for Jerusalem and Judah? The 5 poems of the book represent the authentic voice of Israel in exile, a mourner wailing over the judgment of God, desperately seeking an audience with him but finding him hidden and inaccessible. In Prayers in the Dark, Father Lawrence Farley paraphrases the Book of Lamentations and interprets each passage, following it with a meditation on human suffering, not to explain it, but to point a way forward into hope. In the words of the sacred text, we find assurance that we are not unique in our suffering and that the way home to the kingdom brings pain as well as joy. Find Prayers in the Dark today at store.ancientfaith.com. That's store.ancientfaith.com.
We're back now with the Lord of Spirits, with Father Andrew Stephen Damick and Father Stephen DeYoung. If you have a question, call now at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. The question, actually, that we're getting from our producers right now is whether we are going to outstrip the mammoth episode of the Amen Sul podcast that Michael Haldis did as a guest with Father Anthony Cook, which I think is like 4 hours and 36 minutes long.
No.
You think we can beat that tonight, Father?
Oh, we can. No, if that, I mean, challenge accepted. If that's where this is going.
I should have said that. Okay, it's going to be a 2 or 3 hour third half, everybody.
Yeah, that was a poor choice of words there.
Oh, man. I shouldn't have revealed that discussion was going on.
Yes.
Yes, No, that was a nice, tidy second half. So good job. Good job.
And thinking that words are just, names applies to things, nominalism. Yeah. If you want a test case of nominalism, here come the Protestants with the imputation of righteousness.
All right.
Segue.
I mean, that's literally what that's about. Yeah.
So, 16th century Protestantism. Wow. Wow. The Protestant Reformation happens, and you get a take from a lot of people, even Orthodox folks. Sometimes they'll say like, oh, the Protestants, they wanted to get rid of the bad stuff that Rome had added since the split, but they threw out the baby with the bathwater. I hope no one has ever actually done that, by the way. Like, just forgot your baby was in the tub.
What a weirdly violent expression.
Yes. But I actually think the opposite. I think the actual case is quite the opposite. I think they did get rid of enough.
Yeah.
Theologically speaking. So essentially, some of our Protestant listeners who identify as Protestant, especially those who are more evangelical bent, may think all this talk of merit and stuff may feel completely foreign to them. Like, yeah, we don't have any of that stuff. That's that weird Catholic stuff. Actually, you do.
Yeah. Actually, we have a super relevant to this very moment call coming from Louisville, Kentucky. So,
okay,
Michael, welcome to the Lord of Spirits podcast.
Hello, can you hear me?
We hear you. Why does everyone say that? I guess it's a question that they have.
I just want to make sure I'm not speaking to the void.
I mean, do you have that problem normally?
How very Nietzschean of you. Coming up again.
Usually not, but you never know. You never know. But yeah, I just want. Yeah, I just wanted to ask specifically about like righteousness. You're probably going to talk about it, but I just wanted to get a clarification about this because I always hear about, especially like Lutheran theologians, they talk about like this righteousness is like like we can never merit it up to it. Like the phrase I've heard, like the righteousness can't cut mustard. And I was trying to figure out like how it would, in compared to Orthodoxy, like what does that righteousness mean, and like how Orthodoxy kind of answers that, like if that makes sense to like righteousness, like what does it mean to be righteous, and like how does it make sense? Because I know Luther, he kept conflicting, like I can never be perfect, or I can never be because I'll be an idol, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is where we're going now. So
yeah. How long do you have to leave the mustard out before it can't be cut?
I want to know how you, I mean, mustard is not usually that viscous that you could cut it. Like, what kind of mustard are we dealing with here? I think it has been left out. That's the problem, is when you leave it out, that's when it can be, that's too long. That's when you
congeals.
Right. I say this as a big mustard lover. It is probably my favorite condiment.
Yeah. So we will answer this call and simultaneously move ahead.
Oh, right. Brilliant, Mike.
In that, so righteousness would, within the system we just described, within the medieval Latin system, righteousness would be sort of that bar we mentioned, right? That righteousness would be sort of infused over time, right? Through the sacraments, through the doing of good deeds, right? Acts of charity, acts of love, all of these things. And that would kind of pile up, right? And when it reached a certain point where you were in a state of grace, that would be you were righteous in the sight of God at that point. You were one of the righteous. And so the shift with Luther, right, is not to get rid of the idea of merit, not to get rid of the idea of there being a bar, not to get rid of really any of the stuff we were just talking about. It's just that he makes it a one-time thing. That the merits of Christ are transferred all at once into your account. And all of your demerits, right, all of your sin, all that wickedness, is transferred into Christ's. All at once. So, boom, you are justified, you are righteous.
Yes.
And doesn't get taken away from you, right? So you can say right then you're saved. You can't lose that state of grace in the Lutheran and then the Calvinist system, right? So it's just all at once. Swap. That's called double imputation. Your sin is imputed to Christ. Christ's righteousness is imputed to you. Wholesale, boom, all at once. And that is the core of Protestantism. That is the core of Protestant soteriology. And so, in terms of the Orthodox view over against this, stay tuned. We're going to get to that at the very end.
Are you going to stick with us to the end, Michael?
Yeah. No, I just wanted to clarify that, because I always I always hear about the Lutheran view about, like, you know, I can never be perfect, so I'm always trying to figure out, like, what does that righteousness mean? Like, Orthodox, because like you said, they rarely define it. I'm like, because especially I can see Luther's fear of, like, I never can be perfect, because I come from an agnostic background, so I kind of understand that fear somewhat. I agree it's, like, exaggerated, but I understand it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And so Luther was living in this fear that he was in and out of this state of grace, right? He'd be in a state of grace, and then he would sin, and then he'd have to run to confession, and then he'd sin again, and he'd have to run confession again. And so this view allowed him a sense of reassurance and security that he didn't have before.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. By saying, no, it just happens all at once. Right.
Yeah. So I was just, I'll definitely listen to see, like, with Orthodoxy, and should, like, the explanation with that, because I'm definitely interested, because it feels like lost, because I'm trying to figure it out. But thank you. I appreciate you answering.
Yeah. Thanks for calling, Michael. You're tracking with us, as we like to say.
Yes.
All right. Well, let's continue rolling down the track.
So that Lutheran view we just described is definitionally extrinsic and transactional. The transactional should be obvious, right? Your double imputation is obviously a transaction, right? But it's also extrinsic. In fact, Luther is going to directly say that. He's going to say salvation is extranos. It's outside of yourself, right? It is not a change in you, okay? This is his famous example of the snow-covered dung heap. Right? So you're justified. You're still a pile of crap. But now pure white snow has fallen all over you. So you look like beautiful and white and pure when God looks at you.
There was a few years ago when we were doing a lot more gardening at my house. We had we actually ordered rather more manure than we had intended to. Like, I think that we thought we were getting cubic feet, but we were getting cubic yards. So, which is literally 9 times as much. And so as a result, we were not able to use it all right away. And so there's this big pile of dung in my backyard, and it snowed. And I remember looking at that, and I'm like, and there it is. There it is. Snow covered.
Some German street near you. Yes.
It's true. It was amazing. Symbolism happens. Isn't that what the man says?
Yes. So then this is this all at once, one-time thing. Boom, it's done. Anyone who tries to come and tell you need to do anything else, or you need to stop doing anything else, or anything at all, right? You tell them to go pound sand. They're trying to bind your conscience. They're preaching works righteousness at you. Right. And as we said, part of the goal here for Luther was assurance. Right. It's what he lacked. Right. It's the neurosis of constantly being afraid that he was going to spend eternity in hell because he had an unconfessed sin. Right. And so changing to this view allowed him to actually, live his life. Right. But here's the problem. Right. Here's the problem. It kind of doesn't work that way. The whole assurance thing. Right? Because even if you say, right, even if you go really evangelical on it and just, you just have to believe and not even believe in anything in particular, right? That's all you have to do. All you have to do. Do you ever believe completely sincerely?
Yeah.
Do you ever trust Christ just totally wholeheartedly?
I mean, I was raised in a tradition which really emphasized this idea. And I knew multiple people who went back and kind of, quote unquote, got saved again because they doubted their sincerity the first time.
Yeah, I asked, I knew a guy who was a former Assembly of God preacher, and I asked him if he had the day he got saved written in the front of his Bible, and he said, yeah, I got all the dates written there.
Oh, man. I mean, some of them will get baptized over and over again.
Yeah.
In connection with that.
So, yeah. How do you know if you really meant it, right? This is real life, right? Be honest. Have you ever really done your best at anything? Your absolute best. There was no way you could have devoted one more second. One more iota of effort. Really? That's iota.
Yeah.
For those who insist on the modern. Yeah. Now you're talking about baby Yoda. I don't know how we got there. Anyway.
Grogu.
Yeah, like who really puts forth maximum effort, right? Yeah. And so there's still, a massive gap for doubt to shift through. This is also where, in the Reformation, particularly the Calvinist Reformation, where you get penal substitutionary atonement. It does not exist before this, because here is where you get the shift to the idea of guilt as forensic, legal, criminal guilt, right? Where Calvin begins teaching that everyone is born guilty of Adam's sin, and the penalty that is due for it is eternal hell.
And this is why, by the way, I just had to take this little aside, that sometimes when Orthodox are, trying to do apologetics against quote unquote Western theology, they will say this about Roman Catholics, that they believe in the inherited guilt, legal guilt of Adam. But it is a Reformation era thing.
Yeah. Catholics will straighten you out on that usually.
You mean you can't just tell another person what they actually believe?
Oh, no, you could totally, as a layperson in a completely different church, come and
absolutely
tell clergy what their church teaches.
Yeah.
As long as you got quotes, as long as you got a lot of quotes.
Got some quotes.
In English, you could do that. Yeah, but so here's where guilt takes on that particular forensic legal flair. It's also important that, what we were just saying, about, sincerity and all this and believing, the Reformers were not unaware of this problem. Right. And so, well, how do you do that? Well, we can't have faith be the one act that you do, right? Because then it opens all those problems. So what sola fide originally meant was not all you have to do is believe. What sola fide originally meant was that faith was not conceived as an act. Faith was something God gave you, that it was an empty virtue. And what that means is, it is not a virtue you acquired. It is not something you practiced. It is not something you did. It's just given to you, and it is purely a receptive faculty. God gives you a faculty called faith through which you receive your salvation passively. Okay? That doesn't get around the problem either. How do you know you've got it?
Yeah.
Especially when you're told you can't do it. Right? You can't believe harder or trust harder because, it's not an act, it's an empty virtue. Right? So again, attempted problem not solved. So, even though obviously you have detected our critical tone, I am sure, through the second half and the formation of the Roman Catholic side of Latin theology, and now the classical Protestant side of Latin theology, now we get to the point where even that all starts to fall apart. Right? Good old Aristotle again. You have generation, and then you have corruption. And we're done with generation in Latin theology. And we're going to start with the descent of Protestantism, which ends up being fairly steep. First, we're going to talk about Protestantism in the United States. Protestantism in the United States, the two big watershed events are the First and Second Great Awakenings. The First Great Awakening happens before, technically, the United States is founded as the United States. It happens within the British colonies. And is Puritan and Calvinist. That is the Urlaire of sort of American Protestantism. Think the Mathers, Continent Increase. Think Jonathan Edwards, not just sinners in the hands of an angry God, but also Jonathan Edwards, who said the only thing people contribute to their salvation is the sin that they need to be saved from. Right. So that's sort of the First Great Awakening. That lays this undergirding. And so that the 18th and 19th centuries are actually sometimes referred to as the Calvinist period in American cultural life. That's how much that form of religion sort of permeated American culture in those years. But then in the 19th century, middle of the 19th century, you get to the Second Great Awakening, which is bluntly a disaster. On all counts, unless you're part of one of the groups that comes out of it, in which case, sorry, not sorry. Still a disaster. The The Second Great Awakening is essentially revivalist. Okay. On Revival, now his name just vanished from my head. Finney, in On Revival.
Charles Finney.
Yeah, says that there is nothing supernatural about conversion. It takes place through the application of particular techniques.
Yeah, there's, it's really, frankly, about manipulating emotions. These are the people that put together what was called the anxious bench, where you would put this bench right up near where the preacher is and get some of these, sinners to sit up there so that they would be extremely close to the preaching and would feel a sense of conviction as a result of the powerful rhetoric that's being preached and have a big emotional experience. And that's what they were trying to engender. It's to set up all the conditions so they could have this big emotional experience. And that's how conversion would occur.
Right. And what we're talking about here with conversion, right? Because we're talking about a fundamentally, again, a culture that's Puritan Calvinist, right? Christianity, right? Remember, the Baptists were one of the groups of English Puritans, right? And the early Baptists were all particular Baptists. They're all Calvinists to an extent, right? That's the culture, right? So we're not talking about atheists in the United States in the Second Great Awakening. We're talking about people who, probably were taken to Sunday school as kids, right? Were baptized as either kids or teenagers and just have drifted away from the church, right? Are living riotously, right? Etc. Right? Things have gone wrong. And so they're just being called upon to just sort of recommit to Christ, to recommit to Christianity. Yeah. And what that does is, combined with Finney's sort of very pragmatic approach and that of the other tent revivalists, is basically theology becomes completely unimportant to the movement.
Yeah, you have to have that experience.
Right? Yeah. And we're trying to be broad, right? To cover everybody, right? So it's just believe and trust in Christ, not anything particular about Christ. We're not going to go into a lot of definition of who he is, what he does. Even the Trinity falls out, right? All these things. And the groups that spin out of this are not only denominations that are now considered evangelical Protestant denominations, but also the Mormons, the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Seventh-day Adventists, right? All come out of this kind of weird fervor, right? And the fact that there's no emphasis on any kind of doctrine or theology, right, allows for that, right? It allows for just enthusiasm, okay? Now, while that's going on in the United States, stuff's going wrong in Europe too, right? Because that's the other place where we got a lot of Protestants. Okay, we've got the Protestant churches in Northern European countries, which at this point have become or are becoming state churches. And we've also got German idealism going on. So we've talked about these guys before. We're not going to go super into detail, but from Kant in the 18th century to Hegel in the 19th century, right? We have philosophy going on, right? And Hegel is very much a Lutheran, very much a Protestant. Lutherans don't want him, I know, but he's a Lutheran through and through. Anyway, I'm not going to go down that rabbit trail right now. But so he sets forth this philosophical and frankly theological vision of a whole world order that's infused with the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is drawing the whole world order toward perfection. Everything is evolving toward perfection. God and humanity coming together. Dogs and cats, mass hysteria. Anyway, right? But all progressing, right? Everything is progressing. God is unfolding himself in ongoing self-revelation. The world is being transformed. by the forces of modernism and enlightenment into a greater and greater place full of freedom and learning and reason. Everything is beautiful, right? And so the Protestantism in Europe becomes what we now refer to generally as liberal Protestantism.
Yeah.
Not because they have political views related to the American quote-unquote left, but liberal in the sense of Enlightenment liberalism, right? Liberal philosophy, classical liberalism. So that happens in Europe. And in the United States, at this point in the 19th century, the best and the brightest, right, of the educated among American Protestants go to Europe to study at European universities. And so pastors and seminary professors are coming back from Europe steeped in this liberal Protestantism, bringing it to the United States. This starts to shift the sort of classical Protestant denominations in the U.S. in this liberal direction. And so you have this kind of fracturing where the Second Great Awakening movements we were talking about before become deeply suspicious of education because of this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? But also the more traditional Protestants, right, or conservative Protestants, guys like J. Gresham Machen et al., right, who are at Princeton, Harvard, Yale, right, and see this change happening, want their traditional, more classical Protestantism to survive. And so they make common cause with a lot of the Second Great Awakening uneducated folks, at least the ones who have kept some semblance of Christian theology around. And you get the publication of the books, The Fundamentals, and this becomes evangelicalism.
Yeah.
Right. Which has this sort of curious mix of anti-intellectualism and then several intellectuals who are seen as leaders and deferred to, right, at the same time.
Still has it. It's still that way. Yeah, yeah.
Right. And so this forms, but in the process, in this rise of evangelicalism, because it is this sort of weird big tent, right, of all these groups, you lose some things. You lose any kind of ecclesiology. You lose any sense that there is a visible church. And there is a church with some kind of visible boundaries that can be determined objectively, right? You lose that. You also lose the idea of any kind of unity in theology because you've got to cross lines. You've got to include your Presbyterians and your dispensationalists. You got to include your premillennialists and your amillennialists. You got to include your people who baptize babies and people who don't, right? They've all got to be in this big tent, which means all of those issues that are in any way controversial, right, have to get demoted to secondary issues.
Yeah, you can just agree to disagree, you know.
Yes, and then arbitrary lines are drawn in terms of what are the primary issues. What are the issues we have to agree on to be in the tent?
And it's why, like, when you see Protestants arguing with each other on the internet and one of them calls the other one a heretic, there's no immediate basis for understanding why they're using that word. Like, on what basis is this one a heretic and this one isn't? You know?
Yeah.
It's like
they just drew the line on the seat in the back seat of the car and said everyone on that side is a heretic.
Right.
This is the line. Everyone over there is a heretic. Yeah. And more, I have what I think is a good analogy for this. You may have heard in political discussions, people make the argument that, like, the founding documents of the United States, the Constitution et al., kind of only work if you have sort of a unified Christian culture.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the early founding fathers said something like this Constitution is only for a Christian and moral people.
Yeah. Now, regardless of what you think of that argument, in terms of politically in the United States. You may not even be in the United States as you listen to this, and you may not care. But I think that is true of what we see in Protestantism. I think when you look at the first generation of the Reformation, things like sola scriptura, right, and things like the distinctions they were making worked fine because you had broadly Christian people who had come out of Latin Christendom, right?
Yeah,
and who had made some changes.
Christian culture.
But we're still within that envelope, still within that culture, right? So yeah, if you push this whole theology and aversion to works righteousness, you could end up in a very antinomian place, right, where people don't do good. But we all know Protestants who have a theology that seems to suggest they should be like that, who nonetheless do a lot of charitable and good things.
Oh, I mean, like the kind that I was raised in, very firmly believed and taught explicitly, like once you are genuinely saved and have that conversion experience, that you are going to heaven no matter what you do after that. Once saved, always saved. But none of them would also say, and that means you should not bother going to church.
Right.
None of them would say that. They would never ever say that.
And so when you have a broadly Christian people steeped in Christian culture, you can ideologically hold to those kind of ideas and not follow them out, right? You can ideologically hold to sola scriptura and still, as all the reformers did, believe in not only the doctrine of the Holy Trinity, as they understood it and had received it in Latin theology, but things like the perpetual virginity of the Theotokos, which all the reformers still held to.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Because they were just broadly Christian, and in this Christian culture, there was no reason to doubt those things. Right? But when you don't have that anymore, when you don't have that understanding anymore, and you just have the principle, right? Only what can be shown in the scriptures, incontrovertibly, or by good and necessary inference, and I'm the judge of what is a good and necessary inference, it all breaks down. It all starts to break down. Now, the Trinity is negotiable, right? I, at a Protestant seminary that I won't name, suggested that if someone does not believe the contents of the Nicene Creed, they're not a Christian, and I was laughed at. They thought that was ridiculous. Not a couple people, everyone.
I mean, this to me is why, as long as we're throwing out somewhat spicy takes, this to me is why this whole kind of the idea of the Reconquista of the main line in the U.S. is a doomed project.
Well, you got to pick on that kid.
It's because
the kid looks like Arvin Engen from Head of the Class.
Really?
And now you got to dog him on this show.
Yeah, no, it's because it's like okay, you know, the idea is like we want to turn the clock back and restore these denominations to where they used to be. But like, well, how do you think they got where they are now? It's not because someone came in and like hijacked the whole 9 yards. It's because they developed into the direction that they were going. As frankly, we've spent the last 3 hours showing. Honestly. So like, you know, if you can turn the clock back, I mean, that's nice, but like, just going to end up.
This is where it goes. This is the problem with the whole thing we said at the beginning about the West, right? You roll it back to right before the Enlightenment. Guess what happens? The Enlightenment again.
Yeah.
Okay. All this quote unquote woke stuff you hate, that's Western culture in its final form. And the only reason it's the final form is that it's about to collapse.
Yeah, which, I mean, I don't want people to get hurt or die or whatever, but I think that some collapse might well be helpful.
Yeah. So, we've talked about how evangelicalism in particular and Protestantism in general has become a mess. And in some cases with evangelicalism only vaguely Christian. And our Roman Catholic friends have probably been like, whew, finally off the hook. I got some bad news for you guys.
Dun, 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 dun.
Because Rome, during this time, has just gotten completely Protestantized. And that's both in the U.S. and Europe. This is just true. This is history, man. This happened.
I mean, I love my Roman Catholic friends. I do have Roman Catholic friends. I love them. But like the Roman Catholic services I have been to over the last 30 years, all of them, frankly, feel like kind of watered down Lutheran services. That's how it, that's how,
or Anglican.
And some, yeah. And, you know, like, yep. It's weird. It seems like there's this, at least in American Catholicism, in terms of its existential reality, there's this kind of battle on the ground between like, will a parish be like mainline Protestants or will they be like evangelical Protestants? You know, and then of course you've got, you know, charismatic Catholics, which is, but the funny thing is, as long as we're being spicy, I guess, I've said this twice now, you know, I always thought in the 80s and 90s when evangelicals were trying to make their own versions of rock and pop music, especially when I became a stagehand and was doing, you know, especially in the summers, doing big concerts down at the arena and stuff, I always felt like the pop and the rock at the evangelical church that I went to was like, by comparison. I feel like the sort of either mainliner or evangelical or occasionally charismatic stuff that the Catholics are doing at their parishes is kind of in comparison to sort of the real versions of those things that are in Protestantism. Like I watched a video of charismatic Catholics. I'm like, come on, give me some real holy rollers here. Like, come on, give me some real Pentecostals. Like, show me some people that mean it, you know? But yeah, I mean, this is what you're saying.
Go big or go home.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're not here. Look, we're not here talking about abuses.
No,
right?
No, this is,
I know Roman Catholics get tired of that. Right?
Sanctioned by bishops.
I'm talking about the mainstream Roman Catholicism.
Yeah.
In the United States has been evangelicalized.
God bless them.
Okay. Go to the Novus Ordo. I know you don't want to go to the Novus Ordo. Okay. None of the Roman Catholic apologists on YouTube go to the Novus Ordo. They all go to Byzantine Rite churches.
It's
and pretend they're Orthodox.
That is the case. Yeah.
But go to the Novus Ordo, okay? Your hymnal has "A Mighty Fortress is Our God" in it.
I know.
By Martin Luther.
That was amazing to me. Like one of the last Catholic masses I went to, I went with I had a Catholic roommate for a while, and sometimes when he had an event or something, I would go with him, you know, because he was my friend. And I remember, you know, pulling the hymnal out of the pew and kind of thumbing through it, and there was "A Mighty Fortress" by, frankly, the world's most famous ex-Catholic. I couldn't believe it. Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
The music, right, is evangelical worship music now, right? You're celebrating the Eucharist at every Mass, but Lutherans do that too, so do Anglicans. It's just become Protestantized. And it's not only become Protestantized in terms of the worship, but culturally it's now being Protestantized, because evangelicalism, that big tent we were talking about, part of what has happened to keep the movement together since the late 70s, and specifically the election of 1980. I'm blaming Reagan for this in large part. Since there isn't any shared theology holding evangelicalism together anymore as a big tent, right? There's no shared theology holding it together. There's no ecclesiology holding it together. No structures, no ecclesial structures holding it together. It's now held together by politics.
Yeah, I think
it's essentially become a political movement now. Okay. And in the United States, Novus Ordo Roman Catholicism has basically joined that political movement, which is a very strange bedfellows type situation, right? Because, you know, you've got Bible pounded Baptists who say that the Roman Catholic Church is the whore of Babylon, but who will line up to go vote for a Roman Catholic government representative because they're pro-life and they've got an R after their name, right? So the American Roman Catholic Church is very quickly just attaching itself, right? And that's the better half, right? The ones who haven't just gone liberal and flaked, right? We won't even talk about them because then we get into the abuses, right? And we're not wanting to beat up on Roman Catholics with the abuses, honestly.
No,
right?
it's.
I know you get sick of that. I'm talking about the best parts. The best parts are problematic now. And in Europe, it's frankly far worse. In Europe, it's also been Protestantized, but it's European Protestantism, meaning it's been Hegelized. If that's not a word, it is now.
Yeah, which probably explains
never
why,
go full Hegel.
Especially a lot of the sort of the Rainbow Coalition gets a lot more truck and a lot less resistance in European Catholicism than it does in American Catholicism.
Right. And Newman, who was no liberal by much of any definition, but Newman, with his development of doctrine hypothesis, which he used to solve various problems, played right into this. I'm pretty sure thoroughly unintentionally, but played right into this because that was seized upon by our Hegel friends. And chief among our Hegel friends, in this case for Roman Catholicism, is Karl Rahner. So there's this phenomenon in Europe where anytime you have a philosopher who is profound and respected and makes some kind of impact in the philosophical world, you then get the Timu theology version of that philosopher shortly thereafter. And the philosopher himself usually doesn't like him if he knows it.
It's like first you get the Beatles and then you have the Monkees.
Except I have some respect for the Monkees.
I will admit there's some Monkees songs that I really like.
Yes.
But still, you have to admit there's a similar kind of relationship going on there.
Yeah. So, Heidegger shows up, you get Rudolf Bultmann, right?
Yeah.
Hegel gives you Karl Rahner. And Karl Rahner, you may not have heard of, even if you're Roman Catholic, you may not have heard of him unless you've studied theology somewhere, specifically modern Roman Catholic theology. He's sometimes referred to as the holy ghostwriter of Vatican II. Because he took this approach, which he called transcendental Thomism.
Wow.
Because the victory of Thomas Aquinas at Trent meant no matter how far out your view is, you gotta pretend you're a Thomist, right? So transcendental Thomism, which is basically Hegel. It is basically God is unfolding his knowledge of himself into the world, right? We grow, things change. He seizes upon Newman's, yes, things develop, but that development now is not like Newman argued, like, the acorn becomes the oak tree, but everything that's in the oak tree was present in the acorn. It could be actual change. It could be actual, we know better now. Right? So, in this view, what you have in the New Testament, in St. Paul's writings, is St. Paul's first century view of these things. It is a stage in the evolution of the unfolding of the knowledge of God, right? An important stage, right? But a stage that's been surpassed. So Rahner will argue that the church now, and by that he means the Roman Catholic Church, he means Rome, that the Church of Rome now, in its self-understanding, in its internal understanding, understands the mystery of Christ better than St. Paul.
Yeah.
Better than St. Peter.
Yeah.
Okay. And that this is an ongoing process. And the reason he's called that vis-a-vis Vatican II is that Vatican II really enshrines his views. Okay. All the Roman Catholic folks who hate Vatican II are right to hate Vatican II. It's a fundamental change, a fundamental European Protestantization of your religion. Okay. That's what it did. But I mean, bad news for you. You're not getting that repealed. Current Bishop of Rome has said, now's the time where we need to really implement Vatican II. That is the vision. That's now where Rome is. Right? And those conservatives, even if now it's primarily a mix of political conservatives and whatever in the U.S., are viewed as a problem. Because they're associated by European Roman Catholics with the fundamentalists, right? The Protestant fundamentalists who opposed the more illumined Protestantism that came out of Europe. Okay. So, time fails. Obviously, there's a ton of stuff we left out. Major figures we left out. We didn't talk about the papacy. We didn't talk about all kinds of elements. You can't cover all of the history of Latin theology in one episode, no matter how long I keep Father Andrew up. But we wanted to take this trajectory through it. And there are probably elements of this that we talked about and that we didn't talk about that we'll return to in future episodes, inevitably, if the show goes long enough. But we wanted to go down this one trajectory, this one winding historical road, right, to show this thread so we can make a particular contrast, right? Liberalization, the place where we ended up, is the fruit of the tree. It's not this weird thing that's cut in. It's not this foreign thing.
Yeah,
right.
It's not a hijacking.
It is along this trajectory, right, that Latin theology has taken. And this trajectory that accelerated after the split with the East. And that liberalization, that sense of development, that sense that, oh, now we understand it's cool to have 16-year-old girls hand out the Eucharist in a Roman Catholic church.
Which is, I mean, they're called extraordinary Eucharistic ministers, but it's ordinary.
It's ordinary now.
It's completely normal. The vast majority, at least in the U.S., the vast majority of Roman Catholics are not receiving communion from a priest. They're receiving it from a layman.
Often in one kind still. Can you imagine Thomas Aquinas, let alone St. Augustine, seeing that?
Yeah.
Right? And unless your response to me is, well, of course not. They were sexist and didn't understand God as well as we do, right? Then you're not on board with the program. They're going to be drumming you out as soon as they can. Okay. In contrast, in the East, in the Orthodox Church, right, everything is oriented toward preservationism, toward keeping things the way they are and keeping them alive. And if you want to be like certain apologists online and say, well, it didn't really achieve the form you have it in exactly until like the 5th century, I'll give you that, right? I'll give you 5th century church versus, 21st century church any day of the year. Which one do you want to be part of? Right? We'll just take Latin, right? You offer me the choice. Do I want to be a member of the Roman Catholic Church today, or a Protestant church today, or a member of St. Augustine's Church in North Africa in the 5th century? I'm going to take his every day. St. Augustine's every day of the week, twice on Sunday. Although I can't receive the Eucharist twice on Sunday. So I guess I just hang around. But you get the point, right? There is over time in Latin theology redefinition, slippage, loss, right? And it's not something you can just correct. It's not something where you can just roll back the clock. I would love it if we could just go into the Church of Rome, sweep things up, clean things up, and come back into communion. But it's not possible. I'm sorry. It's not possible. The things that would have to change would dismantle it. It would be what it is. Same thing with any Protestant church you name. And so you end up with, right, people need to just join the Orthodox Church.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's on balance a good thing that, you know, there are like official conversations that go on between Orthodox and Protestants and Orthodox and Roman Catholics. I don't like if you know, some of them have the stated goal of restoring communion. I don't think that that's going to happen. And I don't think that they can actually achieve that through dialogues. I mean, there's these commissions, and it seems pretty clear that even when one of these commissions puts out another agreed statement or whatever, that literally no one follows it. Like no one who's actually in charge, you know, signs it or anything like that. But I still think it's good for the sake of friendship. I think it's good for the sake of witnessing to the Orthodox faith to non-Orthodox people. You know, just show that we're open and that we care about people who are in other religious groups. That said, when like a lot of the work that I do is connecting with people who are learning about the Orthodox Church for the first time, considering it for the first time, becoming Orthodox, trying to convert, trying to tell other people about it. And overwhelmingly, the thing that people say that they're coming for is not what you read in some media accounts. They're not coming because like, oh, here I know that my political views will have a hearing or whatever. I'm sure there are people like that, but that is not my experience. No, the thing that they keep saying over and over again, both men and women, is that they're there because they want a deep spiritual life, which means that they're not getting it somewhere else. And I think that when you have this, this recipe for change that we've been discussing for the last 3+ hours, that what ends up happening is that you don't actually have depth. You might have accumulated lots of stuff over the centuries, but what you've accumulated ends up becoming this kind of moving target of confusion that's not consistent with itself, right? And so you can't grasp onto that. And then on the other side, you get the sort of non-accumulating groups, you know, the kinds that say, well, history is bunk and it doesn't matter any of that. Just, you know, believe in Jesus, trust Jesus, and you're good. Then what you end up getting is something that is very shallow. It can't be deeply shallow. And why would people become Orthodox Christians? Because they know from their experience, not just because some apologist or whoever told them, they know from their experience that it's going to be the same. And we've done whole episodes on this podcast about how the Orthodox Church changes, and that's a very different kind of thing than what we've been talking about for this episode. The ways that the Orthodox Church changes are not fundamental to its identity. And so I think one of the reasons why many people are showing up at our doors and knocking on our doors, even though there has not been some big evangelistic push that we've been all working on together, is a sense that the changing of the world and on many of the changes that have been wrought, particularly by a lot of the stuff that happened in the Protestant Reformation, really picked up then, and then has it feels like it's accelerating now. You know, that it feels like society is collapsing, and you know, I don't know what that means exactly. You can have different levels of collapse and different kinds of collapse. Collapse doesn't necessarily mean we're going to have, you know, civil war or anything like that, or big financial crisis. Although, you know, who knows? I don't know about those things. I don't know how to predict those things. But I think that there is definitely a collapse of the sense of the narrative of our culture, a collapse of the sense of what we are together, and the feeling that this has been accelerating, especially over the last 5 years, particularly 5-6 years, I think is what led a lot of people to say, hold on a second, I want to be part of the story that is the story. And I know that probably in the days and weeks that follow this episode getting published, there'll probably be some people that will listen to it, and they probably will not get to this point of the episode, and will be, quite unhappy. But I hope that whatever unhappiness they might have in listening to some of these criticisms that we've leveled will at least make them think for a moment about whether or not they might be true. And if they don't think they're true, I pray that they are as faithful to God as they can be wherever it is that they are. But if they might be true, I think it's worth looking into. And it's very worth looking into what it is that the Orthodox Church truly is. It is not a community of perfect people. It's not a community of perfect church leaders. We got as many failures as anybody else in terms of who we are as persons. But it has definitely a different mentality about what it means for the church to sojourn in this world. And so, to all of you who are escaping the confusion and the chaos and the weirdness and coming to the Orthodox Church, however you got here, welcome. And welcome home. And dig in, because this is the place to be.
So, aside from blackpilling everyone, Latin theology and its lack of a future, I want to make clear, as we went through this sort of genealogy, and I hope in vain, I know it's in vain, that people won't actually take it, as Father Andrew said, as criticisms, but take it as descriptive. That's what I was trying to do. Right, to be descriptive of currents and cross currents and things, and as explanatory, sort of how we got here. Because I don't meet a lot of Roman Catholic people who say, "I'm super happy with the way the Roman Catholic Church is going," and I live in a 70% Roman Catholic area. Right, so I meet some trads who. It reminds me of the movie Gladiator, right? They believe in the dream that was once held of a place called Rome, right? There is this thing that they believe in. There is this thing, but they probably, most of all people, are painfully aware that it doesn't correspond to the day-to-day reality. And that's why they try to find their Latin Mass, they try to find their trad parish, they go to a Byzantine Rite parish, right? Something, but those places are getting closed down. Let's be honest. They're the enemy as far as their hierarchy is concerned. I don't run into Protestants, right? Whether we're talking about confessional Protestants, of whom I know a fair number, from my seminary days and beyond. I don't know a lot of confessional Protestants who are looking around. I don't know what he says online, but I bet you if you got Jordan Cooper, got a couple of beers in him, he'd admit that the prospects of American Lutheranism and the current scene is not filling him with hope. The evangelical scene, I know people who are fired up politically on the evangelical scene. And some of them are fired up in a particular church plant, but that church plant is usually the 5th or 6th church plant they've been a part of. And that's sort of their pattern, is just going to do church plants and getting fired up. And when the fire dies down, they bolt. I don't know anybody who looks out at the Protestant or evangelical or Roman Catholic religious scene today and is filled with positivity about it and thinks it's in a good place. And I have to be honest with you. I can honestly say that when I look at the Orthodox Church today, I can be happy and think it's in a good place. That doesn't mean it's perfect, right? We got problems. We got all kinds of problems, right? We got scandals too. Our scandals are dealt with a little differently than some of the scandals in other parts, in other communions. But we have them. We have flaws. But the flaws we have and the problems we have, the difficulties we have, are the flaws and difficulties that the church has faced in every generation forever. They're not new problems. They're not problems that result from an abandonment of core Christian teachings. They're not problems that result from having lost elements of traditional Christian praxis. People who are fervent and traditional about the Orthodox faith are not considered the enemy by the hierarchy of the Orthodox Church. They may want to rein in their zeal once in a while, but they're not the enemy. They're not trying to drive them out of the church for being traditional, right? Or conservative, right? That's not a thing in the Orthodox Church. So again, I'm not trying to be critical, I'm trying to be descriptive. And all of this is aimed at the movements, not the individuals, right? St. Augustine is a saint. But Thomas Aquinas was a good man. He was a good man. He was a godly man. He was trying to follow God. He was a brilliant man who was trying to follow God. That's not just Father Stephen DeYoung going off the reservation, okay? Read the early Orthodox responses when Orthodox bishops read Thomas Aquinas. You know what they say about him? They say, if only he had been born here instead of in the West. They said, think of what he could have done if he had been born here with that mind and that desire to serve God, if he hadn't been burdened with things like the Filioque and these other doctrines, right? If he hadn't had to work within the framework of 13th century Latin theology. Think of how glorious that could have been. There is no negative statement in there about Thomas Aquinas as a person. None. Right? So this is not about, I mean, there are a couple people we've named. Charles Finney, I have some issues with, right? Karl Rahner. Hegel seems like an interesting cat. I don't know. I might have a beer with him. Kant, boring as heck. But this isn't about people. And this isn't about, if you're listening to this isn't about you. Okay? When I talk about evangelicalism becoming a political movement more than a religious movement, I'm not criticizing you, right? I'm trying, hopefully, to give you some clarity about what's happening around you, what's going on at your church, what's going on with the culture of your church, what's going on with the way Christ is talked about by political figures today in the United States. Right? And if you're a Roman Catholic, I'm not here to criticize you or put you down, right? Again, I'm trying to be descriptive and say, hey, where did this come from? Why are these things happening in your parish? Why are people leaving your parish? Right? Why did your bishop get fired if you live across the border in Texas? Right? What's happening? What are these things I'm hearing from Europe coming out of the Vatican, right? How does this all fit together? How does this make sense? That's what I hope we did with this episode, right? This was not, I'm going to say a bunch of bad things about your church and then tell you need to join mine because mine's better. Okay? This is us trying to describe what's happening to you, hopefully give you some clarity and some understanding, some things to think about, and then say, there's a safe haven from all of that here in the Orthodox Church. Doesn't mean your life's going to be easy, right? Once you become an Orthodox Christian and really devote yourself to the Christian life, that's when the hard part begins. Right? But the difficulties will be the difficulty of working out your salvation, not the difficulty of reconciling bad theology, not the difficulty of being persecuted by your own bishop, not the difficulty of hearing political rally speeches instead of a sermon, not the inability to get basic doctrinal questions answered, right? It's going to be a different kind of difficult, and a kind of difficult that's salvific, that makes people holy, right, and leads them to the kingdom of God. So address all your hate mail to Father Andrew at ancientfaith.com.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. That's our show for tonight. If you didn't happen to get us on the phone live, you can still get in touch with us. You can email us at lordofspirits@ancientfaith.com. You can send a message to our Facebook page. You can also leave us a voicemail at speakpipe.com/lordofspirits. If you have basic questions about Orthodox Christianity, or you need help to find a parish to live that life the Father was just talking about, go to orthodoxintro.org.
And join us for our live broadcast on the second and fourth Thursdays of the month at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. 47 deadbeats living in the backstreet, northeast, west, south, all in the same house.
If you're on Facebook, you can follow our page. You can also join our discussion group and leave ratings and reviews so that other people can see them, and share the show directly with a friend who you know is going to love it.
And finally, be sure to go to ancientfaith.com/support and help make sure we and lots of other AFR podcasters stay on the air. Sitting in a back room, waiting for the big boom. I'm in a bedroom, waiting for my baby.
Thank you, good night, and God bless you.
You've been listening to the Lord of Spirits with Orthodox Christian priests, Father Andrew Stephen Damick and Father Stephen DeYoung, a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio. And I beheld, and I heard the voice of many angels round about the throne, and the beasts, and the elders, and the number of them was 10,000 times 10,000, and thousands of thousands, saying with a loud voice, Worthy is the Lamb that was slain to receive power, and riches, and wisdom, and strength, and honor, and glory, and blessing. Revelation chapter 5, verses 11 through 12.